Chapter 81. Dean came to the finance department on the first floor of the headquarters hall. He received the gold coins for the 7 cold crystals that he had handed over. These 7 gold coins were equivalent to the savings of an ordinary family in the residential district for more than 10 years. Even Jura and her husband, who had a good position, only had a monthly salary of 5 or 6 silver coins, which was already considered as a high salary class. Although a gold coin was equivalent to 10,000 yuan in the old era, but in this era, the salary of the basic class was extremely low. Just like in the early days of the old era, the monthly salary of the basic class was very low. Just like in the early days of the old era, 1 or 200 yuan per month was considered good. A household with 10,000 yuan could be called a small landlord. And this was only a small part of Dean's scavenging income. Dean held the heavy and smooth gold coins. His heart could not help but sigh, but he was not excited. After all, this was exchanged with his life. Moreover, if he wasn't a hunter, he would only be able to get 7 silver coins. That was 2 months' salary of the basic class of workers. Therefore, if a scavenger wanted to get rich quickly, he had to rely on luck to pick up particularly precious items. I don't know how much the other things I brought back are worth, Dean secretly thought. Although he had 7 gold coins in his hand, he could be regarded as rich in the residential area, but alchemy was a money-burning profession. This amount of money could not satisfy his appetite. After putting the gold coins into his pocket, Dean went to the hall to sit and wait. Not long after, there was a sudden commotion outside the headquarters hall. Dean looked up and saw a tall woman in scarlet armor pushing open the door of the hall and striding in. Her face was incomparably cold and full of chilliness. Dean glanced at the silver eagle medal on her shoulder. This was the hunter medal. 3 years ago, he had seen it on Fino and Rudolph, who led him to the hunter's castle. However, the eagle medal of the 2 men was bronze, but this woman's was silver. The staff in the hall and several consortium scavengers who were about to go on a mission also noticed the medal on the woman's shoulder. After all, her armor was too strange. The scarlet color was like flowing blood, and the style was different from the scavenger's soft armor of Dean and others. It was easy to attract attention. It's the hunter. The people in the hall suddenly quieted down and carefully looked at the woman. Ask the person in charge here to come out. The scarlet-armored woman stood in the middle of the hall and said in a cold voice. The 2 girls in front of the reception desk looked nervous. One of them hurriedly answered and trotted into the room next door. Soon, Peter and the manager of the room came out together. When they saw the badge on the scarlet-armored woman's shoulder, their complexion changed. They quickly bowed and respectfully said, "Greetings, Miss Hunter. I didn't know you would come. Cut the crap." The scarlet-armored woman raised her hand and interrupted them. "Call the scavengers who are going to the 8th area now," she said coldly. Peter and the skinny old man were surprised. They looked at each other and saw the meaning in each other's eyes. Peter respectfully said, "Sir Hunter, they have returned to their respective residences. It will take some time to gather them. Please wait a moment." The scarlet-armored woman looked at him coldly and said, "Don't dawdle. If I don't see him before sunset, humph, just you wait." Peter's forehead overflowed with cold sweat. Yes, absolutely don't dare to delay." The scarlet-armored woman slightly looked up and glanced around. She came to the rest area, where Dean was, and sat down on the sofa. Her eyes saw Dean, who was drinking milk tea. Her eyebrows raised. Peter followed her figure and noticed Dean. He couldn't help but secretly shouted, "Boy, haven't you seen the hunter? What are you doing? Quickly salute and get out of here." Dean saw a trace of anxiety in Peter's eyes. He immediately understood that Peter wanted to give him some time. Listening to the woman's previous words, it was obviously related to the hunter who died in the 8th area. He couldn't help but frown. He didn't expect trouble to come to his door so soon. However, he wasn't worried about anything. He nodded to the scarlet woman and got up to leave. "Wait." The scarlet woman suddenly looked up at him. "Are you a new scavenger?" Dean paused and looked back at her. "Yes." "So?" The scarlet woman narrowed her eyes. "Have you been to the 8th area?" Dean looked at her eyes that were getting colder and colder. It seemed that as long as he nodded, she would immediately attack. This kind of killing intent made him slightly frown. There was a bit of disgust in his heart. Yes. The killing intent in the Scarlet Woman's eyes suddenly soared. The original brown-gray eyes became a bit dark red. She coldly said, "Little devil, why didn't you die? How could a lowly trash like you be able to survive? Why? Why didn't you die?" As she spoke, the skin on her arm became a little red, as if it was congested. Peter saw the scene and hurriedly said, "Mr. Hunter, Dean is our seed target. He is specially cultivated by the headquarters. He has the potential to become a hunter in the future. Please don't be offended by him. If he has offended you, I will make sure that he will apologize to you. Get out." The Scarlet Woman roared. Peter was stunned by the roar. The Scarlet Woman slowly stood up and stared at Dean condescendingly. Her eyes were full of resentment, anger, and sadness. Dean thought that she had investigated the evidence left by him. He didn't expect that she was just angry at him. Seeing the sadness and anger in her strange eyes, he couldn't help but ask, "I heard that a hunter died in the 8th area. Who is he to you?" "Shut up." The Scarlet Woman angrily raised her hand to slap him. Dean's face slightly changed. He quickly leaned back to escape the slap. At the same time, he quickly retreated a few steps to open the distance. When he looked at her again, there was a bit of anger and killing intent in his heart. If this slap was on an ordinary scavenger like Mason, you would at least be seriously injured. He was very clear about the strength of a hunter. At the same time, he also believed that the strength of this woman must be stronger than him. Peter was also shocked when he saw the other side attack. When he saw Dean dodge the slap, he was shocked and speechless. The Scarlet Woman was also startled. She looked up at Dean. The grief and anger in her eyes suddenly turned cold. "You are a new scavenger. Even if you have been blessed 20 or even 30 times, you may not have such a reaction speed. Who the hell are you?" Dean's eyes became cold. Although he knew that the woman was sad and angry, but from a merciless slap, it was obvious that she didn't care about the severity. Perhaps in the eyes of the other side, even if she accidentally killed a scavenger, she would only get a few words of criticism. Even Consortium would take the initiative to shelter her and help her destroy the evidence and confession to avoid the judgment of the magistrate. Because the punishment for killing was too light, she didn't care about life. "Today, I will remember this slap." Dean stared at her and said, "If others give me a benefit, I will return it tenfold. If they give me a pain, I will retaliate 100-fold. Chapter 82. Stop. Suddenly, a light shout resounded. A burly figure quickly appeared between Dean and the Scarlet Woman. He raised his hand and grabbed the Scarlet Woman's thigh. The moment he touched the thigh, the surging force made his face change slightly. He took 2 steps back to resist the momentum. The Scarlet Woman turned around and landed on the ground. She coldly looked at the burly figure in front of Dean. "Bud, get out of the way." The burly middle-aged man named Bud slightly frowned. "Don't mess around, Linda. This little brother is a new hunter. I came here on behalf of the hunter headquarters to appoint him." The eyes of the people in the hall suddenly fell on Dean's body. They were full of disbelief. Peter and the lean old man slightly opened their mouths, dumbfounded. Dean looked at the woman. He thought that it was a coincidence that she came. Otherwise, he would have to run out of the street to avoid the attack of this crazy woman. A new hunter? Linda was slightly startled. Suddenly, she thought of something. Her face quickly turned gloomy. Her brown eyes turned completely dark red. Dark red blood vessels appeared on her arms. Her whole body was shrouded in a bloody aura. She fiercely said, "So, the one who picked up the bargain is this little devil?" Bud frowned. "I know that your brother is dead. You are very sad, but I hope you don't make a mistake. You should know how serious the consequences are if you attack a hunter from the same consortium. Don't destroy your future." The Scarlet Woman didn't seem to hear his words. She stared at Dean with blood-red eyes. "Did you watch my brother being eaten by a monster? Why didn't you get eaten? Why? You're just a scavenger. What qualifications do you have to have magic marks?" Dean looked at her indifferently and didn't speak. The Scarlet Woman stared at him. After a while, the killing intent on her face suddenly disappeared little by little, and the dark red veins on her arms gradually disappeared into her skin. She licked her lips and said, "Little thing, you just said that you will take revenge on me 100-fold, right?" Bud was relieved when he saw her restrain her killing intent. If the other party recklessly rushed over, he may not be able to stop her. He immediately turned to Dean. "Your name is Dean, right? Apologize to Linda, and this matter will be over. In the future, both of you will still be partners in the mission. It's just a misunderstanding. Why make it unpleasant?" Dean frowned. His intuition told him that this woman would never give up, but considering the consequences, he temporarily held back his killing intent. Even if he apologized, it was impossible to let this matter pass. Most importantly, why should he apologize? Just because your brother is dead, you can vent your anger on others? Even if it was revenge, it was your younger brother who took the initiative to harm others. Could it be that others were not allowed to retaliate? "Don't apologize, little thing. Didn't you say that you want to retaliate against me? I welcome it." The Scarlet Woman, Linda, said in a feminine tone. Dean's face was cold as he indifferently said, "Really? I didn't expect that the hunter who was eaten was your brother. No wonder you were so angry. I can understand. After all, his death was very ugly and miserable." Linda's eyes suddenly became cold. Her fingers clenched into fists. Her knuckles made cracking sounds, but she finally loosened her hands. She left the hall without looking back. She quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. Bud smiled and looked back at Dean. "Little brother, you are really good. You are overpraising me. Compared to her, I am still too far away. After all, she used her hands, but I could only use my mouth." Dean calmly said. Bud sighed. "Don't blame her. Her parents died early, so she and her brother were dependent on each other. Who knew that her brother would die? Her emotional disorder is normal." Dean looked at him strangely. "There are many orphans in the world. Do you think you can vent your anger on innocent people just because your loved ones died? Her brother was eaten by a monster. She didn't vent her anger on the monsters, but on us, the weak scavengers. Isn't the life of a scavenger important? Just because their status is not as high as hers, they can be bullied and humiliated. Moreover, after being bullied and humiliated, do you want to understand her? Sympathize with her?" Bud was startled. He was speechless. "Forget it." Bud slightly shook his head. He didn't continue to talk about this issue. There was a trace of smile on his face. "You are not a scavenger. I am here at the request of the headquarters to appoint you as a hunter and award you a medal." Dean nodded slightly and no longer said anything. But in his heart, he secretly remembered this woman. This matter wouldn't end here. There were the rules of the consortium. This woman may not harm him on the surface, but she would secretly trip him up. Instead of waiting for others to take the initiative to find trouble, it was better to take the initiative to attack. This is the hunter contract. After signing it, you will be an official hunter of the consortium. Bud pulled out a document from his bag and handed it to Dean. Dean temporarily put away the plan in his mind and carefully read the hunter contract. It was roughly the same as the scavenger contract. The only difference was the proportion of shares and the implementation of tasks. There are also various benefits. The hunter would get a free house in the commercial district of the consortium, as well as a property certificate. However, the property certificate didn't have inheritance rights. In other words, when the hunter died, the house would return to the hands of the consortium. In addition, the hunter would get 10 God's blessings every month. As a seed target, you only got one per month. But now the treatment of God's blessings was 10 times better. As for other aspects of treatment, it was even more amazing. The hunter could enjoy a 30% discount in all the industries under the consortium. It was equivalent to a VIP level of preferential treatment. The industries of the Melon Consortium involve coal mining, real estate, hotels, slaves, transportation, and so on. Each of these industries had a large number of chain stores. Therefore, this 30% discount was by no means a small benefit. Dean read the contract one by one. After sweeping through the benefits, he looked at other restrictive clauses. After determining that there were no unbearable clauses, he signed his name. "This is your hunter medal." Bud handed a bronze eagle medal to Dean. Dean took a look and asked, "Her medal is silver. What does it mean?" Bud smiled. It seems that you are very careful. She has recently been promoted to Bloody Swordsman. She has become an intermediate hunter. We commonly call her Silver Hunter. She is your superior. When you perform tasks, the captain is a Silver Hunter. Dean slightly frowned. It would be very dangerous if he was assigned to the same team as this woman during the next task. This is the Hunter's Handbook. You can go back and read it slowly. It is about the hunter, but remember not to show it to other non-hunter personnel. In addition, if you lose your medal, be sure to find the headquarters and apply for it. Bud handed out a small booklet. Chapter 83. You have just been appointed. You have 7 days to adjust and rest. Bede smiled and said, after 7 days, you will go to the headquarters to report. Although you have hunter magic marks, but you are still lacking in other aspects. Hunters have different positions. The specifics are written here. You can go back and think about it. Dean thought of the bloody swordsman he had mentioned before. He nodded, I know. In addition, it is recommended that you live in the commercial district. Hunters are not scavengers. Sometimes there will be an emergency gathering. Efficiency is the most important. For example, if a monster is detected in a certain area, you need to be dispatched immediately to prevent the monster from running away. So hunters are usually on standby in the commercial district. Dean understood and nodded. The air and radiation content in the commercial district were better than the residential district. Even if Bud didn't mention it, he would have moved here. This time he brought Jura and her husband to live together with him. It was also a way to repay their adoption. If there is nothing else, I'll go first. Bud laughed. Dudian watched him leave the hall. He looked at the booklet and medal in his hand. As for the hunter armor, he should report to the headquarters after 7 days. So he wasn't in a hurry to collect it. At this time, Peter and the skinny old man cautiously approached Dean. They looked at the genuine hunter medal in Dean's hand. They couldn't believe it. However, the two of them were able to sit in this position. Their eyesight was extremely keen. They had guessed the general reason from the previous conversation and performance between Bud and Linda. Dean. Peter's face was somewhat unnatural as he smiled. I didn't expect you to be a hunter. Congratulations. Congratulations. The skinny old man also congratulated him. Dean smiled. It's all because of your training. I won't forget the care you have given me. Not at all. Peter quickly waved his hand. It's what we should do. It's your own efforts that have made you. I thought that in a few years you might have the opportunity to become a hunter. I didn't expect that in the blink of an eye you would have the bronze medal in your hand. As expected of a seed candidate. Impressive, impressive. The skinny old man echoed. Dean felt a bit unnatural as he was praised by them. He knew that his identity had changed, so he didn't take the initiative to say that they didn't need to be too polite. On the contrary, it would make him look superior. At the same time, he realized the terrible changes in the system. This was a change that went deep into the bone marrow. He secretly sighed in his heart. He had seen the cruelty outside the giant wall. It was very difficult for him to integrate into the consortium or other ordinary work system. This was why he didn't want to bow his head in front of that woman. Instead, he bluntly expressed his inner anger. First, he knew that bowing his head was useless. Second, he didn't want to. Anyone who had seen the fragility of life and the possibility of dying in the middle of a mission at any time would not be willing to tolerate the humiliation of others. Perhaps this was the reason why hunters had such a strong character and hostility. I still have something to do. I'll take my leave first. Dudian looked at Peter and the old man. I'll come back when I have time. I have 3 good brothers, so I'll have to trouble you two to take care of them. Leave it to me. Peter smiled. Dean nodded slightly and left the hall after saying goodbye to them. Peter and the old man looked at each other and sighed with emotion. Other people in the hall were envious and jealous. They knew that Dean would live in a world that they couldn't touch. It's time to go back. Outside the headquarters hall, Dean called a consortium carriage and went to the residential area. On the way, he sat in the carriage and flipped through the thin booklet in his hand. He saw that the information inside was divided into several chapters. The first chapter was about the purpose and responsibility of the hunters. Dean naturally knew that it was to hunt the monsters outside the giant wall. The second chapter was about the types of hunters. There are a total of 4 professions, namely knight, warrior, thief, and hunter. For positions are responsible for different work. Hunters pay attention to team action. Whether it is the efficiency of hunting monsters or the degree of safety, they are maximized. Knight and warrior are responsible for attracting the monsters in the front. Thief is responsible for scouting the surrounding environment. Hunter is responsible for long-range attack. Dean sighed in his heart. This is like modern war. There are infantry who are responsible for the front row firepower output and attracting the enemy. There are Air Force surprise attacks and artillery long-range attacks. It seems that whether it is a large-scale operation or a small group operation, there are no more than 3 aspects: frontal containment, long-range attack, and intelligence collection. All primary hunters are basic professions. After mastering the various abilities of the profession, you can pass the advanced assessment and become an intermediate hunter. At the same time, you can choose different specialties. Knight's advancement has shield knight, beast knight, and so on. Swordsman also has shield swordsman and battle swordsman. The previous woman was called bloody swordsman. It was a combination of her ability and the title given by others. In fact, she should be a battle swordsman. Dean understood that the hunter he had killed before should be a hunter. Hunter was responsible for tracking the enemy and long-range shooting. In the long history of the development of hunters, there's been a systematic distribution within the giant wall. This way, the benefits and efficiency can be maximized. After all, people's energy is limited. Everyone specializes in one thing. Through teamwork, even if the monster is much stronger than them, they can easily kill it. Previously, Bud asked me to think about it so that I can choose my future position. Dean thoughtfully said, Knights are mainly good at close combat, but the monsters outside the giant wall are much stronger than hunters. If it is a frontal confrontation, I will suffer a loss. I need to cooperate with long-range hunters to have high efficiency. Thieves are mainly good at traps and assassination. Their frontal ability is too weak, and it is troublesome to arrange traps. Gunpowder, firearms, these things will be my secret weapons. Before I grow up, I naturally can't easily reveal them in front of others, so I'm suitable for single combat. Only thieves and hunters have the ability to fight alone. Among them, hunters are more independent. As long as the environment cooperates, they can easily kill monsters that are much stronger than themselves. Just like that hunter, he only needs a few scavengers to help him to kill that giant black beast. Thinking of this, Dean immediately made up his mind that he will mainly learn to be a hunter. Moreover, the concept of gunpowder helped him open up his mind. The first time he saw a hunter, his mind flashed. He thought that if he tied gunpowder to his bow and arrow, wouldn't the lethality increase by several times? Chapter 84. Commercial District, Radiation Boundary, Mullen Street. This was the property of the Mel family. It was also the place where most of the hunters of the Mellon Consortium lived. Most of the houses allocated by the consortium to the hunters were concentrated in this area. The main reason was that it was close to the giant wall. It was relatively faster to gather the hunters in an emergency. Moreover, it was difficult for the prey to escape. At the moment, in a small European-style building on Mullen Street, Linda was sitting in the living room on the 3rd floor. She had a gloomy face. In addition to her, Gail and another young man, as well as a dark-skinned girl, were also sitting here. They were Linda's team members and often went on missions together. They had a deep relationship with each other. So when they got the news, they rushed over. Boss, is it really a scavenger kid? Another young man couldn't believe it. He is just a scavenger, but he has the courage to set fire to the defiler. He is too bold. Even I was scared to death when I saw such a monster. It took me a long time to get used to it. So, you are very mediocre. Linda indifferently looked up at him. This little guy is the top graduate of the scavenger school. He was first in all 3 categories. Although it is just a scavenger's little tricks, but he can climb to the top in any field. He is not a small character. Gail deeply nodded. I heard that this little guy threatened you to retaliate. Well, retaliate against the captain? The dark-skinned girl frowned. The ignorant are fearless. He thinks that by becoming a hunter, he can be on an equal footing with the others. He's just a lucky and bold little devil. If he can say such words, then it means that he has reached this point. In my opinion, although we can't kill him openly, but there are many ways to make him suffer. Or we can hire assassins and kill him in secret. Linda slowly shook her head and coldly said, "There are many ways to kill him. Even if I kill him on the surface, he's still valuable to the consortium. But if he's dead, he's worthless. The consortium won't do anything to me. At most, they'll punish me or make me perform a few more missions. But it's not worth it. He's not worthy enough to make me pay the price." Gale nodded. "Yes, even if we secretly assassinate him now, the consortium will know about it, although there is no evidence. But this kind of behavior against the consortium will certainly cause displeasure. It will be inevitable that they will gradually suppress us." "Yes," Linda nodded. The dark-skinned girl understood. She thought for a moment. "In that case, we won't kill him for the time being, but let him suffer a little. Isn't he going to live in the commercial district? We can make him feel better about the house. We will cut off his water supply and see how he will live. In addition, everyone in the consortium will give you some face. As long as you say it, I can guarantee that he will be very uncomfortable from the moment he steps into the hunter headquarters." Linda indifferently said, "These little tricks are meaningless. Using such little tricks will make the higher-ups look down on me. Moreover, it will alert the enemy. During this time, we will let this little devil have a good time. Once he arrives outside the giant wall, I will let him suffer a fate worse than death." Gale nodded. "There is no law outside the giant wall. If he dies, then he dies, as long as he doesn't leave any evidence. But after he arrives at the hunter headquarters, he will receive vocational training. The shortest is a few months, and the longest is 1 or 2 years. We will have to wait for a long time." Linda coldly smiled. "It won't be easy for him to have a safe and steady training. If my guess is right, he will choose the hunter profession. This profession is a perfect match for his super sense of smell. Once he chooses this profession, I will let him die a very ugly death." "Oh," Gale and the other two looked at her curiously. "In case of an emergency, trainee hunters like him will also be sent outside the giant wall." Linda's eyes were cold as she looked at Gale. "You are also a hunter. There are very few hunters in the consortium. If you're injured and other hunters have their own tasks, what do you think the consortium will do in case of an emergency?" The three were startled. Their eyes suddenly lit up. "Haha, the boss is smart." Another youth laughed. The dark-skinned girl sighed. "He is indeed the captain. He hasn't learned the basic skills of a hunter yet. If he is sent outside the giant wall, even if the consortium intends to transfer him to another team, as long as we say a word, the other team will see him as a hindrance. They will certainly not treat him well." "Yes," Gale nodded. The scarlet killing intent in Linda's eyes slowly converged. "Let's not talk about this matter for the time being. The main reason why I called you here is because of the task. We're going to Area Number 3. You should prepare well." "Area Number 3? Gale and the other two were surprised. "I have long heard that most of the monsters in Area Number 3 are around level 10. There are even monsters that can reach level 20. Of course, it is better if we don't encounter those monsters. If the captain takes the lead, we can hunt some monsters that are level 10 and make a fortune." The dark-skinned girl said with a smile. Another youth's eyes lit up. "I have heard that there is a giant deer in Area Number 3. The oil in its body is the highest level lamp oil. It is more expensive than gold." Gale slightly frowned. "Wealth and danger are equal. There are many teams that have fallen in Area Number 3. We have to be careful." Linda nodded and said, "Yes, but our goal this time is to find named monsters. There should be a great chance of encountering a rare monster at the level of Dreadtainer. If you can kill one, your magic marks will evolve again." Hearing this, Gale and the other two's eyes lit up. Dean closed the book. The second chapter described the details of other privileges of hunters and the details of the profession. He simply looked at it. By this time, The carriage had passed the boundary wall and arrived at the residential area. After a while, the carriage stopped in the middle of Lincoln Street. Dean got off the carriage with his luggage. Because of the consortium's carriage, he didn't have to pay the fare. He looked at the familiar white guardrail. There was a bit of nostalgia in his heart. "Who is it?" Jura opened the door and saw Dean at the door. Her face was full of surprise. "You are back. Come in." Dean nodded and went into the house. Chapter 85. Dean saw the joy in his eyes and the scattered white hairs in his hair. He suddenly felt that although they adopted him, but he didn't fulfill his obligations as a son. Although 3 years ago he was engaged to the Avril family, but the hatred in his heart has long been soothed. His father often said that people are not saints, so who can avoid mistakes? "You have lost so much weight after leaving for more than 10 days. Jura looked at Dean distressed. Grace smiled. "Come sit down and talk." Dean nodded slightly and put down the bag. He came to the table and talked with them about the business district. As for the task, it was confidential, so he didn't want to talk about it. "Did you say that you have been recognized by the consortium and promoted?" Gray was surprised when he heard Dean's words. It was the first time he was going to be promoted? Wasn't it too fast? Dean took out the key. "The consortium has assigned me a house. We can move to a new house later." Jura was stunned. Directly assigned a house? So generous. Gee, the Melon Consortium is really something. Gray apparently had heard the news about the Melon Consortium. He sighed and shook his head. "However, your mother and I have been living here for too long. We are very familiar with the surrounding neighbors. Moving to a new place is not easy. Moreover, my work is not far from home." Dudian said. "Well, then I can only live alone in the commercial district." Dean regretfully said, "Well, you are about to reach the age of marriage. You should learn to be independent." "Huh? Wait, what did you just say? Live in the commercial district? You mean the house assigned to you by the consortium is in the commercial district?" "Yes. When can we move there?" "Anytime." "Haha." Gray suddenly laughed. His lifelong pursuit was to live in the commercial district and see the life of the people. He didn't expect that such a wish would come true so suddenly. Jura covered her mouth and chuckled. She looked at Dean with eyes full of concern and gratification. She didn't expect Dean to give them such a big surprise. Dean couldn't help but smile when he saw them so happy. Suddenly, he thought of something. He took out a gold coin from his arms and said, "This is what I earned during the mission. I borrowed a lot from you before. The rest is filial piety." Gray and Jura were surprised when they saw the gold coin. They didn't expect to earn 1 gold coin in just 10 days. This was much higher than their salary. It was simply incomparable. "You earned this." Jura couldn't help but ask, "What is your task? Is it very difficult? You were sent for training in the past, and you're a guard. Don't tell me your mission is very dangerous?" Years of living had taught her that effort and gain were proportional. There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. Even if there was one, it would be in the trash can. Dean smiled and said, "No, we are not going to war. There is no danger. The task is more complicated, so we need training. Most people can't do it." He grinned. Jura looked at him suspiciously. "Really?" Dean nodded with absolute certainty. Jura was relieved and laughed. "So, you really have the ability. When I first saw you, I felt that you were different from other children." Suddenly, she felt her husband's arm touch her and winked at her. She suddenly realized that she shouldn't continue to talk about the orphanage, so as not to evoke Dean's memories. Dean noticed Gray's small movements but didn't care. Instead, he felt a little guilty. He knew that although he could be good to them, but he would never forget his biological parents and his sister, who love him since childhood. They firmly occupied too much position in his heart. No one could replace them. "After we move to the new house, I'll help you get a position in the consortium," Dean said to the two. "In this way, you don't have to work. You get a basic salary every month. You don't have to be so frugal. Eat what you should eat. Use what you should use. I'll make a lot of money in the future." This was one of his hunter privileges. As long as he used his connections, he could pick a gap in the various industrial chains of the consortium. Gray laughed. "I'm still healthy. I don't need you to take care of me. Although you're in a lot, but you can't spend money carelessly. You should save it to marry a wife and have children in the future. Do you understand? Speaking of this, Jura suddenly smiled. Dean, a few days ago I met an aunt. She's a very good person. Her daughter is almost at the age of marriage. She wants to meet you. What do you think? Dean's face turned red. He was quite embarrassed. You are almost at the age of marriage. You should consider it. Gray also said. Dean blushed with shame. He was still a quarter away from 12 years old. 13 years old was the legal age for marriage. Moreover, in his worldview, even if he was 13 years old, he was just a kid. He couldn't get married and have children. But in this era, people were aging fast. Diseases, disasters, and other problems would take a lot of lives every year. Even if the radiation accumulated in the body, people would lose fertility. So they would get married very early. But he couldn't adapt to this. I'll think about it when I reach the age of marriage, Dean euphemistically said. Jura saw the persistence in Dean's eyes. She helplessly said, Well, I won't force you if you don't want to. But you really don't want to see your daughter. I've seen her. She is absolutely a little beauty. I agree, Gray said with a smile. Jura rolled her eyes at him. Dean shook his head again and again. It would be more hurtful to refuse when they met. However, his heart suddenly thought of that moonlit night. They sat side by side in the pavilion in the garden. They looked up at the gray moon and chatted for a whole night. His heartbeat slightly accelerated. He secretly thought, I don't know what she's doing now. Will it be too abrupt if I go to find her directly? Thinking of this, his thoughts drifted away. That night, Dean accompanied Jura and Barton to chat very late. The next morning, just after dawn, Dean's biological clock pulled him up on time. After a simple wash and breakfast, he said goodbye to Jura and Barton and went out. He took a carriage to the slums. Last night, Jura mentioned the orphanage. It made his heart a little anxious. Although he had only lived with Barton for a few months, but now 3 years had passed. Their faces were blurred in his mind. But in his heart, he still remembered that when he first came to the orphanage, it was them who accompanied him. He was very clear about what kind of treatment orphans would face once they passed the age of adoption. Chapter 86. As soon as he returned to the slums, the stench in the air made Dean frown slightly. Now his sense of smell was different from the past. He could smell the slightest odor, not to mention the faint odor that ordinary people could smell. For him, it was very strong. For a while, he felt nauseous and dizzy. This was the physical discomfort caused by the pungent smell. Dean slightly covered his nose, waiting for his body to adapt. At the same time, he realized that an overly strong sense of smell was also a fatal weakness. In the future, if I meet other hunters with such super senses, I can use this method to deal with them. Advantages are disadvantages. It seems that everything has two sides. Dean flashed such an idea in his mind. He got off the carriage and went along the streets. As the saying goes, staying in the toilet for a long time doesn't smell bad. As Dean stayed longer, the feeling of physical discomfort gradually faded. He did not go directly to Mycian Orphanage, but along the path came to the garbage dump that he had been to 3 years ago. As he approached, the strong, rotten smell was getting heavier and heavier. When he arrived at the garbage dump, Dean suddenly saw that several garbage mountains that were previously piled up here had been flattened. There were garbage residues and a newly piled up garbage mountain on the ground. He couldn't help but feel disappointed. Although he had expected that the garbage here would be cleaned up, he didn't expect it to be removed so quickly. I heard that last year there was a plague in the slums, causing many people to be infected. Now the Black Death season is coming again, and the temperature is rising. It is estimated that this pile of garbage was cleaned up not long ago. Dean had some regrets. If he was not selected to go to scavenger special training 3 years ago, he could rely on the remaining energy of the freezer in the garbage dump to learn a lot of knowledge, far more than what he learned in the special training. But at that time, he had no ability to resist and could only obey the arrangement. Just like the conscription in the old era, without a strong background, he had to serve. My freezer was also moved away. It is very likely that it was seen when it was being moved. As long as the news is leaked, with the intelligence network of various consortia and military, They should not let the freezer be left outside. After all, such a metal object can be seen from the outside. Perhaps at this moment, it has been moved somewhere and secretly studied. Fortunately, I did not leave my photo inside. Otherwise, it would be big trouble. Dean secretly thought. At this time, he suddenly smelled something approaching, and suddenly his face turned cold. This was the advantage of the sense of smell. Before the eyes could see, they could detect in advance. He looked back and saw two middle-aged men and a young man in ragged clothes coming out from the back alley. The three of them surrounded him from three different directions. They were holding sticks, rusty hatchet, and dirty black stones in their hands. They stared at Dean gloomily and approached him step by step. "Brat," the middle-aged man with disheveled hair in the middle growled, "if you know what's good for you, hand over your money and clothes." Three refugees. Dean looked at their clothes and knew their identity. Even in the slums, they were at the bottom of the society. Refugees were equivalent to homeless people. Moreover, their bodies had accumulated excessive radiation. Even if they were to work as coolies, few places would accept them so as not to affect the health of others. "Aren't you going to kill me?" Dean faintly smiled. The three of them looked at each other. From the fine fabric of Dean's clothes, they knew that Dean was not from their slums, so they just wanted to rob the money and leave. Once he killed someone, especially in the residential area, most of the magistrate would be involved in the investigation. This was what they were afraid of. However, they did not expect that the brat did not seem to have the slightest fear on his face. "Brat, don't talk nonsense or I'll waste you." The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and shouted. Dean's figure flashed and suddenly flew out. Bang! Bang! As the middle-aged man said, Dean was really too lazy to be long-winded. He knocked the three of them to the ground. He was about to ask them about the whereabouts of the garbage dump, but suddenly thought that if the freezer was taken away by the military or other forces for investigation, maybe they would send someone to keep an eye on this place and investigate who had placed a freezer in the garbage dump. Thinking of this, he could not help but be surprised. He was somewhat glad that if he went to ask, it was equal to falling into the trap. He immediately cut off the idea, kicked the middle-aged man, and shouted, "Let me ask you, how to get to the Mission orphanage? I'm lost." The middle-aged man's face was full of horror. It was difficult to understand how such a little guy could have such terrible speed and strength. However, just as the perception of the residential district toward the commercial district was mysterious and yearning, the residential district was also mysterious in the slums. He didn't dare to think too much and hurriedly said, "Yes, go out of this road and turn left. After crossing 2 streets, turn right. At that time, just ask someone and you will know." Dean snorted and turned away. He naturally knew the way to the Mission orphanage. He just wanted to explain the reason why he came here through the mouth of the middle-aged man. If there was any force secretly observing here, or if they wanted to investigate here, they would not suspect him. The energy of the freezer has been exhausted. If the overall level of technology and industry has not been improved, it is impossible to research anything. But this is the only thing left to me by my parents. If I find out who took it, I must get it back," Dean secretly said in his heart. After 10 minutes of walking, he came to the front of the Mission orphanage. The orphanage located on the hillside was still very dilapidated. 3 years had only made it more old. Dean saw a slightly chubby woman in front of the gate, sweeping the sparse lawn in front of the orphanage. "Aunt Di," Dean shouted. The middle-aged woman turned back in surprise and looked at Dean with doubt. "You are Dean." Dean smiled. There weren't many children in the orphanage. In just 3 years, she hadn't forgotten the boy. Moreover, among all the children she had seen, the fair-skinned boy had left a deep impression on her. She couldn't help but look at Dean from head to toe. The outline of his face overlapped with her memory. She said happily, "Dean, you're back. How are you? How are you with your parents?" "Very good." Dean smiled. "I came back to see Barton and Joseph." Daly was stunned. "Joseph is still in the orphanage. But you can't see Barton. He has been sent to the column mine last year." Dean slightly frowned. He remembered that Barton should have just turned 13 years old. Even if he was sent to the mine, it should be during the black snow season. However, It was useless to say anything more to Diley. He immediately said, I understand. I'll go to the mine to find him later. I'll have a trouble Aunt Di to call Joseph, Crone, and Barry out. I want to redeem their residences. Chapter 87. Dean nodded slightly. He was naturally aware of this point, but with his current status, it was not a problem to lift the registration of a slave. Moreover, the Mysian orphanage was the property of the Mel family. His words were not light. He immediately said, Let's call Joseph and the others out first. I will take them away from here. Daly said anxiously, It'll take a lot of money to redeem them. If you steal more than 1 silver coin, you'll be sent to jail. Don't be stupid. This is my own money. Duddian knew that he couldn't explain to her in a few words. He took out his medal and said, I have been selected as a guard. The monthly salary is quite high. Daly was astonished. You become a guard? Dean put away the medal. Sorry to trouble you. She looked at Dean in amazement. I didn't expect you to be selected as a guard. You should be one of the most promising ones in the orphanage in the past few years. Do you remember Lisa, who was adopted in the same batch as you? She's also doing well, although the one who adopted her is Mel's gardener. That child is smart and witty. She was recognized by Mel's miss and was accepted as a personal maid. Last year, she came back once and asked about your situation. She is also a nostalgic person. If you have any difficulties in the future, maybe you can ask her for help. Duddian was surprised. His mind suddenly recalled the time when he first adopted the girl. At that time, he felt that she was very young, but her true nature was hidden very deep. He almost suffered a loss. He didn't expect that she would be so good now. However, it had already been a few years, and he was not in the mood to argue about it. He said, I understand. After a while, 3 children ran out of the orphanage. It was Joseph, Crone, and Barry who had slept in the same dormitory as Duddian. As soon as the 3 of them came out, they saw Dean and were stunned. In the past 3 years, the few people who used to squeeze in the dormitory had changed a lot, especially Dean. He had absorbed better nutrition, and his body had developed extremely well. It was completely different from the thin appearance he had in the past. Joseph and the other 2 had changed a lot. They were half a head taller. Joseph's face was swollen. It was extremely scary. Crone's left hand was congenital deformity. His arm was only half long, and his fingers were the size of a baby. Barry's situation was better. There was nothing unusual on the surface. However, Dean had seen several sarcomas on his stomach. They were the places where the radiation had condensed. Living in the orphanage, the 3 of them were much stronger than Mason and the other 2. They quickly recognized Dean. Joseph's face was full of surprise. He quickly approached Dean. Dean, how are you? Dean smiled. It's good. This time I had the opportunity to come back to see you. The main thing is to take you out of here. You don't need to bring clothes or anything else. Once you're done, we will go find Barton. The 3 of them were stunned. Joseph stuttered. You mean you want to take us away? Dean laughed. Don't you trust me? Crone responded quickly. Of course I trust you. But Dean, do you have money? I have some. It should be enough to redeem you. Dean looked at the hope and excitement in their eyes. He knew how eager they were to leave. He laughed. Go and pack your things. I'll go and handle the household registration procedures for you. The 3 of them looked at each other, but quickly nodded. They turned and ran back to the orphanage. Dean came to the front yard of the orphanage. He saw the stout woman who had helped him last time. She was sitting behind the counter. She was yawning and listless. There was a dark-skinned little boy next to her who was massaging her legs. The little boy was quite alert. He saw Dean and gently signaled the stout woman to come in. The stout woman opened her eyes. She sat up straight as she saw Dean. There was a smile on her face. Excuse me, who are you? I'm here to redeem the children and handle the household registration procedures. Dean replied. The stout woman shook her head. If you want to adopt, you have to wait until the adoption day. I want it now. Duddian interrupted her. The so-called adoption day was the day when the orphanage was launched. The purpose was to maximize the benefits. The orphanages in this world and the orphanages of the old era were 2 different things. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were human traffickers. Moreover, they had a business license. Our rules. The stout woman quickly explained. Dean was too lazy to listen to her. He took out the guard's medal. You can only manage yourself. I want it now. You'd better handle it right away. The stout woman's face changed as she saw the medal. The guard was a public official of the military. Although Dean looked young, but his height and special training had polished his appearance to that of a 15 or 16-year-old boy. She didn't doubt him. I know. I'll handle it for you. Joseph Crone Barry. Dean reported the names of the adoptive children. The stout woman was stunned, but quickly registered. After a moment, all the procedures were completed. The fee was 2 silver coins per person. Seeing the gold coins thrown by Dean, the chunky woman immediately understood that the person in front of her was a real big shot. She did not dare to neglect and immediately gave Dean the change. At this time, Darley came in. She saw Dean put away the contract. How is it? Is it done? Dean nodded slightly. They are waiting for you outside. Darley laughed. I hope they will remember the kindness and repay you in the future. You are wrong. This time I am repaying a debt of gratitude, Dudian said as he left with the 3 people's household registration contracts. The stout woman looked at Dean's back. Sister Darley, who is that person? You seem to know him? Darley smiled. Do you remember the kid called Dean from 3 years ago? It's him. The stout woman's eyes widened. I thought he looked familiar. How did he become a guard? In front of the orphanage, Dean looked at Joseph and the other 2 who were carrying bulging bags. They were nervously waiting in the open space. He smiled and waved the contract in his hand. Let's go. It's done. This is your household registration. The 3 of them trembled with excitement as they looked at the paper in front of them. Joseph's eyes were red as tears gushed out. He looked at Dean and said, Dean, Dean was embarrassed as he looked at the 3 of them. Let's not be polite. Let's go. Barton is waiting for us. Dean, I really want to thank you, Crone said in a heavy tone. Well, otherwise we would be like Barton. Barry clenched his fists. Dean smiled. Don't be so mushy. Let's go. Seeing this, the 3 of them didn't say anything else. Before they left, they turned back to look at the orphanage. They also saw Daly and the short and fat woman at the door. They didn't know that their lives would be completely changed after they left. Chapter 88. Columine was under the control of the Foster Coal Chamber of Commerce, a subsidiary of the Mel family. It mainly produced iron ore and was located in the western suburbs of the slums. Dudian called a carriage and took the 3 of them straight away. The number of carriages in the slums was very small. Usually, only the managers of the chambers of commerce or factories in the slums would take the carriage for the convenience of travel. It was the first time for Joseph and the other 2 to sit in a carriage. They were nervous and didn't dare to move for fear of dirtying the seats in the carriage. Dudian knew that they were used to the hard life, and it was difficult for them to get used to it. Half an hour later, they arrived in front of the Colin mine in the western suburbs. The most conspicuous and imposing building in the town in front of the mine was the Foster Coal Chamber of Commerce branch responsible for the mine. Dudian stopped the carriage in front of the Chamber of Commerce. Dudian took the lead in getting off the carriage. He paid the fare of 8 copper coins and turned to look at the Chamber of Commerce. He called Joseph and the other 2 to come to the front of the Chamber of Commerce. 2 young guards were chatting listlessly at the door. They straightened up a bit when they saw the newcomer, but after seeing that it was just a few children, they restored their lazy appearance. One of them looked up and down at Dudian. This is Foster's Chamber of Commerce. What can I do for you? Dudian said. Let the person in charge come and see me. The 2 were stunned. One of them rolled his eyes and said, Little brother, you're from the residential area, right? If you're here to buy minerals or place an order on behalf of your master, there will be someone in charge of receiving you. As for meeting our branch president, he doesn't have time to deal with you. Dudian took out the guard medal and said, You just need to pass the message. I'm here on behalf of the Mel family. The 2 guards were stunned when they saw the crossed sword medal. They carefully looked at it to determine that it was not forged. They looked at Dudian suspiciously. The first one hesitated for a moment and said, Wait a minute, I'll go and ask. I haven't asked your name yet. He is not qualified to know, Dudian indifferently said. The guard muttered in his heart when he heard Dean's tone. But Dean was, after all, a guard. Although he had no right to intervene in the Chamber of Commerce, but Dean said that he came on behalf of Mel's family, so the meaning was different. Soon after, the guard ran in. Dudian also followed in. The other guard didn't dare to stop him. Dudian came to the hall of the Chamber of Commerce. He had seen the luxurious atmosphere of various buildings in the commercial district. This hall of the Chamber of Commerce in the slums was a bit shabby in his eyes. He casually found a sofa and sat down. Joseph and others also came to sit and rest. It was the first time that Joseph and others came to such a luxurious and clean place. They were nervous and restrained in their hearts. After a while, the guard returned, and a tall woman followed behind him. The guard saw Dean sitting in the hall and immediately respectfully said to the woman behind him. The woman looked at Dean. She frowned as her eyes swept over to Joseph and the other two who were sitting next to him. There was a touch of coldness on her face. She walked over and said, "Excuse me, are you sent by Mel's family?" Dean noticed the doubt and contempt in the woman's eyes. He raised his eyebrows. "Are you the branch president here?" "I'm the director." The woman frowned when she saw Duddy and didn't answer her question. Dudien's face was cold, but he was too lazy to pursue the matter. He said, "I'm here to pick up a person. It's the miner who was assigned to your place not long ago. Can you make a decision on this matter?" The tall woman immediately knew the purpose of Dudien's visit. Her expression was somewhat displeased. "All the miners have been registered as slaves. If you have the handwritten order of the nobility, I can give it to you. Otherwise, you have to pay a high compensation to buy them. Even if you buy them, they are still slaves. Even if they are killed by others, they won't get compensation." Dudien took out his hunter medal and indifferently said, "Do you know this?" The tall woman was surprised and shook her head. "I haven't seen it." "Then let your branch president come over," Dudien said. The tall woman couldn't help but choke with anger. "You are a guard. If you don't have the handwritten order of the Mel family, I have no right to inform you. The branch president is very busy. Not everyone can see him. Even if you are a guard, you have no right to interfere with our Chamber of Commerce." Dudien looked at her and said, "I can only tell you that as long as I say a word, your job will end. You're not qualified to know my identity. Go and call your branch president. Otherwise, you will bear the consequences." The tall woman wanted to laugh, but when she saw Dudien's cold eyes, she couldn't laugh. She suddenly thought that since he was a guard, he shouldn't be a crazy person. She was a little scared when she heard Dudien's tone. Maybe he really had a background that she didn't know. She slightly gritted her teeth and said, "Well, you wait here. I'll help you inform the president." Then she turned and left quickly. Joseph and the other two people were a little stunned. They didn't expect Dudien's attitude to be so tough and overbearing. It was completely different from the silent and thin boy in their impression. After a moment, a middle-aged man in a black suit followed behind the tall woman. He frowned when he saw Dudien and others from far away, but he still maintained courtesy. He held back his temper and said, "Hello, I'm the branch president here. May I ask who you are?" He looked at Dudien. It seemed that as long as Dudien's answer didn't satisfy him, he would immediately let them go. Dudien naturally felt the doubt and impatience in the other person's eyes. He was too lazy to say more. He raised the hunter medal and said, "Do you know me?" The middle-aged man's eyes were sharp. He immediately saw the pattern on the medal. His pupils shrank as he looked at Dudien in horror. He quickly reacted and bowed. "Greetings, elder." Dudien saw that the middle-aged man knew him. The coldness in his eyes also disappeared. He ordered, "I want to bring a person called Barton. He is a miner who was assigned to your place not long ago. Bring him here immediately." The middle-aged man quickly said, "Yes, I'll do it." He turned back and waved to the tall woman, indicating her to deal with it immediately. The tall woman was surprised to see the middle-aged man's awe-inspiring attitude. She had only seen such an attitude from the president of the Chamber of Commerce. She couldn't help but think of Dudien's previous words. Her back was slightly erect. Fortunately, she resisted the impulse. Otherwise, she was likely to lose her job. Half an hour later, The tall woman came back with a dark and thin boy like a monkey. Her eyebrows were slightly wrinkled as she endured the unpleasant smell of the boy. She brought the boy in front of Dudian and respectfully said, "Elder, this is the person you want." Dudian's eyes had already seen Barton. What made him a little stunned was that after 3 years, Barton, who was a little lame, was like a little old man. His whole body was black and incomparably thin. From his side, Dudian could see rows of ribs. His hair was dirty, and there was no flesh on his face, which made his eye sockets deep. Barton's eyes fell on Joseph and the other two. He was stunned. Joseph and the other two recognized Barton at a glance. They immediately jumped up from their seats. "Old Barton, it's me. We came to find you." "You? How did you become so thin? Don't you have food to eat as a miner?" The three of them looked at the thin Barton. They were pleasantly surprised and distressed at the same time. Barton's throat was hoarse as he asked in confusion, Why are you here?" "It was Dean who brought us." Crone pointed to Dean. "Dean redeemed us." "Dean?" Barton looked at Dean in a daze. Dudian didn't expect that in just 1 year of life as a miner, he would be tortured like this. He sighed, "I'm late. Are you okay?" Barton was sure that he didn't recognize the wrong person. His eyes were filled with tears. You still remember me." I thought, Dudian sighed. "I've been at other places for the past 3 years. Otherwise, I would have been able to redeem you in advance." The middle-aged man was more convinced of Dudian's identity as he heard Dudian's words. He respectfully said, "Elder, Barton is the youngest miner here. He has always been taken care of. However, the living conditions of miners are poor. We can't do anything about it. It's the rules of the higher-ups." "You shut up." Dudian glanced at him. The middle-aged man was startled and immediately shut his mouth. He knew what kind of monster he was facing. Even if he killed the middle-aged man, he would at most be punished. Facing such an existence, he could only keep a respectful distance from him. The tall woman was stunned. She felt that she had underestimated Dudian's identity. "Let's go." Dudian stood up. He didn't pursue the matter. Although Barton wasn't taken care of, as the middle-aged man had said, but at least the middle-aged man wasn't wrong. It was the rules of the higher-ups. Chapter 89. Dean took Joseph, Barton, and others to a nearby tavern after leaving the branch of Fulton's Chamber of Commerce. He ordered a table full of dishes so that they could have a full meal. After all, they had been busy for half a day. Moreover, it was almost time for dinner. Everyone was hungry. "Dean, we can't eat so much." Crone swallowed his saliva as he looked at the table full of dishes. Dean smiled. "If you can't finish, then throw it away. It's not worth much." "That won't do. Let's finish." They couldn't help but wolf down the food. At this time, a waitress came over. She covered her nose as she looked at Joseph and others. She said to Dean, "You ordered a total of 68 copper coins." Dean frowned. "We haven't finished eating yet. We eat first and then pay the bill," the waitress said in a cold voice. Dean was a bit unhappy, but he was too lazy to care about it. He took out a silver coin and threw it into the tray in her hand. "You don't have to keep the change. Give me 3 more portions." The waitress was surprised. She didn't expect Dean to be so generous. She didn't say anything as she went back to the kitchen to add more food. So expensive. Barton and others were embarrassed as they heard the girl's words. They didn't know whether they should swallow or not. Dean waved his hand. "It's just a small amount. You can eat as much as you want. I'm not sure of money." Barton and the others were relieved to see that Dean didn't care or feel distressed. They continued to gobble up the food. "Dean, where did you get the money from?" Barton was about to ask when he saw other guests come into the tavern. He quickly lowered his head and ate the food in front of him. Dean smiled. He took them out of the tavern as they were almost done eating. They found a hillside nearby. He smelled that there was no one within 2 or 3 miles. He looked at them. "What are your plans for the future?" Barton and Joseph looked at each other. Joseph stammered, I don't know. I think I can find some odd jobs. I should be able to get some food." "Me too," Barry said. Dean looked at Barton and Crone. He saw that their expressions were the same. He nodded. "I have redeemed you, so I won't ignore you." There are 3 paths for you to choose. First, I have a house in the commercial district. I lack gardeners, and servants. You can take up these positions and help me take care of the house. Of course, I won't treat you as servants. It's just a name. A house in the business district? Barton and the others widened their eyes in astonishment. Duddy nodded, yes. Second, I will give each of you a sum of money. As for what you want to do in the future, I won't interfere. And the last one is to be my assistant and help me do things. Be your assistant? Barton and the others were immediately tempted. Dean said in a serious tone, but what I'm going to do is very dangerous. You might even lose your life. It's a bit illegal. The few of them were taken aback and looked at each other hesitantly. Barton looked up at Duddy and, I choose the third option. I'll help you with your work, but I'm afraid that I won't be able to help you. Dean looked at him and nodded. I'm giving you such an opportunity because I value your ability. Don't worry about it. I'll help you. Joseph stuttered. If it wasn't for you, I would have been sent to the mines. If I worked like Barton, I would have lost my life. No matter what you want me to do, I'll listen to you. Dean nodded. I want to explain that it is very dangerous to follow me. It is a road of no return. You don't need to repay me in this way because I redeemed you. You don't owe me anything. I just want to repay you for taking care of me. Joseph was stunned. He looked at Crone and Barry. I'm willing to follow you. Although it's illegal, but I believe that you won't be caught so easily with your intelligence. I don't want to be a poor person anymore. I want to stand at the top. I want to have a lot of money. Hearing his words, Crone and Barry, who were still hesitating, couldn't help but tremble. They raised their heads and resolutely said, We'll join too. Dean didn't expect Joseph to have such awareness. He smiled. Making money is just a side effect. As long as you do, well, you'll have so much money that you won't be able to spend it. As he said that, he took out 4 gold coins from his waist pouch and said, This is our current startup capital. There will be new funds after a period of time. These 4 gold coins are for you. My request is that you find a remote place as soon as possible, the more remote the better, and then build a secret small-scale factory. Barton and the others looked at the gold coins. Their heartbeats accelerated. Crone couldn't help but ask, Aren't you afraid that we'll run away with the gold coins? Dean looked at him. I trust you. Crone's eyes were red. At present, I don't have enough money. After a while, I will have more money. I will have extra funds for you to study. As for your body, I will try to find a way to treat it. Dudeen said. The 4 of them were startled. There was hope in their eyes. Now, you'd better change your clothes first. Otherwise, with your current clothes, you will be robbed as soon as you take out the gold coins. Dean smiled. Joseph and the others looked at each other and laughed. Dean looked at the time. It was getting late. He said to the 4 of them, If you want to contact me, then leave a code in the square in front of the orphanage. I'll come over when I have time. Remember to keep your identity confidential. We know. Crone laughed. Dean looked at Barton. I'll find a way to restore your slave status as soon as possible. Don't worry. I'm not worried. There was a smile on Barton's face. Dean smiled as he bid farewell to the others. Dean hired a carriage and returned to the residential area after leaving the hillside. The return trip took more than an hour. The sky was getting dark. The curfew time would be coming soon. Jura and her husband were busy preparing dinner when Dean returned home. Both of them asked about Dean's whereabouts during the day. Dean casually said that he was strolling around. They didn't think much about it. After all, in their opinion, Dean was about to reach the age of marriage. Moreover, he was a guard. Naturally, he should have some personal space. Dean got up on time the next morning. He went out after breakfast. Chapter 90. On the left side of Wall Street, in front of an ordinary alley, a delicate-looking boy passed by with a piece of black Ganoderma bread in his hand. Suddenly, the bread in his hand fell to the ground. He was shocked and hurriedly bent down to pick it up, but the bread was covered in dust. He didn't know whether to pick it up or not, so he squatted in front of the bread, hesitating. The pedestrians on the street were rushing to work, so they just glanced at him and didn't pay much attention. The boy lowered his head and seemed to be distressed about the bread, but no one saw his nose sniffing slightly. The boy was Dean. At the moment, his attention was focused on the smell. He gently inhaled so that the smell would rush to the olfactory cells at the top of his nose. There are all kinds of smells on the street, but tracking the smell was like a physical instinct. He didn't need to learn to master it. Dean focused his senses on the smell emitted from the hidden chamber in the alley. Through the various smells, a vague outline of the chamber emerged in his mind. Smell of sulfur, smell of yellow phosphorus. Someone? 3 people? One of the smells has a light fragrance. It should be a girl. Dean was surprised. He didn't expect that there would be people in the secret chamber. Did the alchemy apprentices do experiments here every day? Dean slightly thought and shifted his sense of smell to the house on the street above the secret chamber. He immediately smelled the faint smell of old dust. No one lived in it, and it seemed to have been empty for a long time. There is an alchemy chamber under this empty house. The owner of the empty house is either dead or the owner of the alchemy chamber. Dean secretly thought. He picked up the bread, patted the dust on it, and went straight down the street. Although through the smell, he didn't find anyone in the high position of the buildings on both sides of the street. There should be no special sentries. Nevertheless, to be cautious, he had to put on a show. He left the street and came to the adjacent street. He found a small tailor shop and immediately went inside. A tailor apprentice boy greeted Dean politely. "Guest, what do you need?" Dean glanced at the clothes hanging in the shop, but didn't find the style he needed. He immediately said, "Help me make a black robe and an ordinary mask." Mask. The tailor apprentice looked at him in doubt, but didn't say anything. "When do you want it? When can it be done?" Dean asked. "I can do it tonight." "All right, I'll pick it up tomorrow at this time." "No problem. What kind of material do you need?" "We have linen fiber, satin, strong, ordinary fabric." Dean asked, "How much is the deposit?" The tailor's apprentice thought for a moment and said, "If you want it to be strong, thick linen fiber is the best. That's 7 copper coins in total. The deposit is half, so I'll take 3. Dean immediately took out 3 copper coins and gave it to him. "The robe should be a little bigger." "All right." The tailor apprentice smiled and took out a ruler to measure Dean's body proportions. He wrote a note to Dean. "Come and get it tomorrow." Dean put away the note and left the tailor's shop. He murmured, "Next is the tattoo problem." If he wanted to sneak into the stronghold, he had to prove that he was an alchemist. The most credible way to prove it was to show his alchemy tattoo. However, this era was far from mastering the laser. Once the tattoo was on the body, it was difficult to wash away. Every time he came back from outside the giant wall, his body would be checked to prevent bringing the virus into the giant wall. It was impossible to hide the tattoo. He pondered for a moment and finally decided to take the risk and try. There was an ink raw material factory in the eastern suburbs. Like most factories, it was located in a remote area close to the radiation zone. Dean came here. He showed his guard's medal and said, "I'm here to do business. By the way, I'm here to check your production environment." The 2 guards were stunned. They looked at him repeatedly to confirm that they were not mistaken. One of them winked at the other and said to Dean, "Wait a minute. I'll help you inform them." Dean nodded and stood at the door to wait. After a moment, the previous guard trotted out with a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man didn't expect to see such a young guard. He looked like a mature child, but he immediately put on a smile and politely said, "Hello. Why didn't you tell us in advance that you are here to check? Aren't we under the management of Mr. Crow?" Dean waved his hand. "I just came to have a look. The main purpose is to do business with you. Do you have gallnut ink here?" The middle-aged man was relieved when he heard Dean's words. He was puzzled. "Gallnut ink? The amount is very small. It has been discontinued. Now everyone uses carbon ink." "That's good." Dean nodded and said, "Give me a bottle of gallnut ink." The middle-aged man choked. He looked up and down at Dean. "Just 1 bottle?" Dean coughed. He was embarrassed. After all, this was a factory and not a shop. However, it was difficult to sell gallnut ink in a shop, so he could only come here. "How much is it?" Dean directly asked the price. He didn't give the middle-aged man the opportunity to refuse. The middle-aged man was speechless, but he still maintained a polite attitude. "Why are you talking about money? I'm giving it to you." Dean didn't hesitate. "I'm short on time. I want it now." "No problem." The middle-aged man glanced at him and said, "Is that all you want? Is there anything else?" Dean smiled. "It's just on the way." The middle-aged man was relieved. He knew that it was a false alarm. "Okay, I'll let someone get it for you." Then he turned and left. After a moment, a thin young man brought a bottle of black ink to Dean. Dean didn't need to open the cap to smell the ink inside. It was gallnut ink. This ink was used in the early days of the wall. Later, people learned to use coal to make carbon ink. Because of the high cost of the ink, the number of people who bought it was getting smaller and smaller. Dean left with the ink. He went to the store to pick up a bottle of men's perfume. He brought it back home and locked it in his small room. The smell of gallnut ink was much lighter than carbon ink. Moreover, carbon ink was often used by people, so the smell was more familiar. That's why Dean took the trouble to buy gallnut ink. Unfortunately, there is no activated charcoal here. Otherwise, the smell could be completely eliminated. Dudian secretly thought. He poured some of the ink into a small bowl, and then poured some of the light perfume he had selected into the bowl to neutralize the smell. He smelled the perfume and felt that the smell did not become strange. He was relieved and then took off his shirt, revealing his healthy wheat skin. Dean looked down at the magic mark on his chest. I don't know if the alchemist apprentices will recognize this magic mark. In any case, it's better to hide it. Immediately, he dipped the quill in ink and drew along the blood-red magic mark on his chest. The cold ink fell on the magic mark, smearing the blood vessels of the magic mark into a pitch-black color. Chapter 91. The next day, Dean went to the tailor's shop to get a robe and a mask. He put on a robe, and the size was just right. He put on a mask and went to the alley on Wall Street. He smelled the smell of two people. There was one less person than yesterday. Sure enough, they are here every day. Dudian entered the alley and put on the mask. He stretched out his hand and pulled up the cloth that was smeared like a wall. He saw that there were bricks inside. If an ordinary person accidentally noticed the cloth, then even if they lifted it, they would only see the wall. But Dudian knew that there was a secret room inside, so he could see the gaps between the bricks at a glance. Dean picked up a stone and tapped it twice. There was no response. Dean tapped the door twice again. At this time, Dean smelled the smell of two people coming closer, just behind the brick wall. He waited for a moment, but didn't see them make a sound. He immediately tapped it twice and controlled his throat to lower his voice. "I'm your companion. I have no malice. I'm also an alchemist. I'm looking for the organization." The two people behind the bricks seemed to be thinking. After a while, there was still no response. Dean suddenly smelled a strange smell. His brows slightly wrinkled as he slowly pulled out one of the bricks. Whoosh! As soon as the brick was pulled out, something shot out from the gap. Dean was prepared and dodged in time. But when this thing fell to the ground, it sputtered out. A few drops fell on the edge of his robe. The black robe was corroded and turned white. It was actually sulfuric acid. Dean looked back at the brick and continued, "I really have no malice. If you were from the Holy Church, you would have already notified the Knights of Light to come and arrest you. I'm your companion." The two people inside didn't seem to think that their sneak attack didn't work. Hearing Dean's words, they also knew that the initiative was in Dean's hands. If they reported to the Holy Church, they would soon be besieged. "How can I believe you?" A female voice came from inside. Dudian asked, "How can you believe me?" After a moment of silence, the female voice said, "Please show me your alchemy tattoo." Dudian smiled. "Let me go in first. It's not safe here. It's easy to attract attention if I stay for a long time." Hearing this, the two people inside seemed to think that it was reasonable. They slowly pulled out the bricks. The light inside was dim, but Dean's vision was not affected. He saw the appearance of the two people. They were wearing masks. From their stature, he could see that they were about the same age as him, a boy and a girl. The boy that he had tracked before was not here. At this moment, the girl was responsible for removing the bricks, and the boy was hiding in a darker place, holding a glass bottle in his hand, which was still half full of sulfuric acid. "Come in," the girl said. Dudian nodded and jumped in. There was a staircase under the bricks, and the place where the bricks were sealed was like a ventilation window. The boy revealed a pair of vigilant eyes as he stared at Dean. "Now can you show your alchemy tattoo?" Dean nodded and lifted his robe to reveal the black cross tattoo on his chest. "Can you see it?" The girl looked closer and said, "It is indeed one of our people. Come with me." Hearing this, the boy was relieved. He called out to Dean and followed behind the girl. Dean followed them down the stairs to a secret room. He saw that the secret room was extremely spacious. There were many shelves with various mineral powders and metal powders. There were no animal remains, eyeballs, or other biological parts. As he expected, they were from the Philosopher's Stone faction. Their goal was to refine this magical stone. "Please come here." The girl came to a table and said. Dean went over. "I want to see your tattoo again." The girl said. Obviously, the dim light in the corridor made her unable to see it clearly. Dean nodded and revealed the black cross on his chest. The girl and the boy came closer and carefully looked at it. They confirmed that it was a black alchemy tattoo. She suddenly came close to Dean's chest and gently sniffed. The warm breath exhaled from her nose made Dean's chest slightly throb. Perfume smell. The girl was puzzled. She smelled the robe on Dean's arm and could not help but look up at Dean. "You are a boy. How can you wear perfume?" Dean coughed and said, "I'm used to it." The girl looked at him strangely, but didn't say anything. She said, "How did you find us? We should be hidden very well. Even if you're an alchemist, you won't be able to recognize the code." She looked at him strangely, but she didn't say anything. Dean told the truth. "I saw a man in the market with a crooked tattoo on his wrist. I followed him and found him." The girl and the boy looked at each other and couldn't help but say angrily, "That stupid mouse. I told him long ago that tattooing on such an obvious part of the wrist is simply courting death. I don't know how his teacher taught him back then." At the moment, the boy who was accompanying his parents for a walk on a street suddenly sneezed twice. Dean sincerely said, "Can I join you? We can do research together." The girl looked at him. "Don't you have your own circle? Didn't your teacher teach you that our circle rarely accepts strange companions?" "My teacher is dead." Dean looked sad. "Several of my research companions have disbanded." The girl was stunned. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." Dean slightly shook his head. "It's all in the past." The girl thought for a moment. "Well, if you are alone, then you can join us. But you're absolutely not allowed to bring in outsiders. You should know that the more people there are, the easier it is to be exposed." Dean was surprised. "I will absolutely keep it confidential." "Well," the girl nodded and smiled. "My name is Nightingale, and he is Viper. Mouse went shopping with his parents today, so he didn't come. If you want to join us, you have to come up with a code name." Dean could not help but wonder, isn't the code name given to us when we join the Dark Church? Yes, that is the official code name. It is also the symbol of our alchemist identity. Nightingale nodded, "But we also have to have a code name to address each other. We can't use our real names. What if someone is arrested and the others are exposed? Did you use your real name in a previous circle?" Dean replied, "No, I used one of the characters in everyone's name. That is also a code name." Nightingale said, "We use an animal as a substitute. Think about it." Dean thought for a moment. "Let's call you Hound." "Hound." Nightingale nodded. "Okay, I will call you Hound." Dean nodded and looked around. "Don't you have a teacher?" Nightingale shook her head. "My teacher won't come to our place. He is busy with his own experiments." The boy called Snake smiled at Dean. "Nightingale is our teacher. She is about to reach the meteorite badge. She will be the youngest one-star alchemist. Isn't she amazing?" Dean was surprised to see the girl. From a moment he came in, he felt that the girl had the right to speak. Sure enough, she was the leader of this small circle. He said, "That's amazing. I haven't been in contact for long. I have to learn a lot from you." Nightingale's voice was a bit shy. "It's not as exaggerated as he said. There are too many smart people. I'm not the youngest. Anyway, I think you're very powerful," Snake said with a smile. Dean looked at him. He thought that this person's character didn't have the slightest relationship with Snake. This codename was a bit of a split personality. "Well, it's time to get busy with the experiment. Do you still want to get the meteorite badge?" Nightingale waved. Viper giggled and went to the next room, closing the door behind him. Chapter 92. Dean looked at some of the bottles and jars on the table. The bottles and jars were labeled, but there were no words on the javelins. Instead, there were strange symbols drawn on them. Some were the sun, some were overlapping with a five-pointed star, some were hooks, and so on. "What's this?" Dean asked. Nightingale saw the bottles and jars he was pointing at. "Don't you know this symbol?" Dean thought for a moment and shook his head. "I don't know. Haven't you memorized the basic alchemy symbols yet?" Nightingale was stunned. It was the first time that Dean heard the words alchemy symbols. Fortunately, he was wearing a mask so that the other party wouldn't be aware of his expression. He thought, alchemy symbols? The role of symbols is usually used to mark something. Oh, I know. It should be something similar to mathematical symbols. There was no record of this in Roseyard's alchemy notes. Dean guessed that most of it was too elementary, so there was no point in recording it. He immediately said, "Yes, I haven't memorized it yet. My things were left with my teacher. My teacher is dead, and my things were seized by the Holy Church. Do you have a compendium of alchemy symbols? Can I borrow it?" Nightingale looked at him suspiciously. But after hearing Dean call the Holy Church damn, she dispelled the doubts in her heart. She pointed to a shelf next to her. There was a thick book with a black cover. "There, take it yourself. But remember not to break it. I only have one." Dean quickly nodded. Thank you. Dean picked up the Alchemy Symbols Encyclopedia. He was about to open it when he heard Nightingale say, "Go to another place, such as a small warehouse. I'm going to do the experiment." Dean came to the small warehouse that she was referring to. It was slightly messy inside. There were tools for cleaning the alchemy room and some broken filters. Dean didn't care. He casually sat down and began to read the Alchemy Symbols Encyclopedia. He saw rows of dazzling alchemy symbols. Below the symbols was a text explanation. Dean soon saw the sun symbol that he had seen before. It represented gold in the alchemist's eyes. No wonder there is golden powder in the bottle, and the amount is very small. Dean murmured and continued to read. Time passed unknowingly. Dean was completely immersed in memorizing the symbols carefully. Through the beginning of the explanation, Dean knew that the alchemy symbols originated from astrological symbols used by diviners. With the decline of diviners, astrological symbols were gradually evolved into alchemy symbols by the rising alchemy warlocks. It formed an independent alchemy symbol system. After an alchemist completed an experiment, the content recorded was usually a large pile of alchemy symbols. If one wasn't an alchemist, they wouldn't be able to understand it at all. Therefore, memorizing the Alchemy Symbol Encyclopedia was one of the basic requirements for an alchemist. He heard Nightingale's voice from outside the warehouse. "Hound, it's getting dark. We're going to go home. Do you want to stay here all night? Do you want to stay here overnight?" Dean didn't expect the time to pass so fast. He immediately closed the book and opened the door. He saw Nightingale and Snake standing at the door. He said, "All right." Nightingale nodded. Snake glanced at the book in Dudian's hand and laughed. "I didn't believe it when Nightingale told me about it. I didn't expect you to not memorize this book. Gee, you're simply an apprentice." "Well, I should call you an apprentice, huh?" Dean heard his joke, smiled, and said, "My memory is poor, so I memorize it slowly. I think you love to be lazy." Viper said in an "I understand you" tone, "Back then, I had a headache trying to memorize this. I thought of all kinds of excuses to escape. In the end, it was my teacher who personally forced me to memorize it. Nightingale, on the other hand, is very smart. I heard that she only spent about a week to memorize it. How could I, who had memorized it for half a year, endure it?" Nightingale smiled and said, "It's not as exaggerated as you say. I couldn't even memorize it in a week. It took me half a month to completely memorize it." "That's very powerful," Snake said in a sad tone. Dean put the book back in place. "Will you come tomorrow?" "Of course," Snake said without thinking. Nightingale shook her head. "I will see the situation. If there is something, I won't come. If there is nothing, I will come." Dean nodded. "I will also come tomorrow." "All right, it's getting late. Let's go back." Nightingale looked at Dean and Snake. "Who will go first?" "I will go first." Viper didn't hesitate as he waved to Dean. He came to the corridor outside the secret wall. and climbed out. "We will go out in a few minutes," Nightingale said. Dean nodded. He knew that she was worried about going out too much at once. It would be easy to attract attention. Moreover, if they left one after the other, they would have time to organize their masks. After a moment, Dean was the second to leave. He climbed into the alley. He saw that no one was paying attention to him. He put away his mask, but still wore the mask on his face. It was not unusual to wear a mask on the street. Most people would think that it was a disease. No one would be willing to get too close to it. Dean was about to go home when he smelled a familiar smell. He couldn't help but be startled. His eyes flashed. He turned to the other side of the street with his head down. Not long after Dean left, a little boy appeared in the alley. He frowned as he looked at the direction of Dean's departure. He said to himself, "He is wearing a mask. He is really careful." He took a deep look at Dean's direction and turned to leave in another direction. Dean appeared at the corner of the street shortly after he left. He looked at the back of the boy and slightly frowned. He didn't expect that Snake would come out ahead of time. He didn't leave, but hid next to him. It should be that he wanted to see his true face. It seems that I can't take it lightly in the future, Dean secretly thought. At the same time, he firmly remembered the other's face. It could be regarded as a fatal weakness of the other. Dean looked at the entrance of the alley. He estimated that Nightingale would come out at the moment. He thought about it and gave up the opportunity to peek at her true face. After all, she didn't do this to him. If people don't offend me, then I won't offend them. Chapter 93. The next day, Dean came back to the secret alchemy room. Viper and the mouse that he had been tracking were also there. The mouse boy should have heard about Dean from Viper. He nervously asked, "Hound, you followed me. So, you have seen my appearance?" Dean nodded. "I have seen it. I will keep it a secret." Rat's face was full of dejection as he said, "I've been exposed again." Viper snappily said, "Who told you to carve the tattoo on your wrist? I think sooner or later you will be purified by the light. Don't betray us." "I won't betray you." Mouse frowned. "My family has engaged me. I want to quit alchemy. Anyway, it's difficult to achieve anything with my level. At most I can get a meteorite badge." Viper shrugged. "Remember to peel off the tattoo if you want to quit. I'm afraid of pain. That's why I'm hesitating." Mouse said helplessly. Dean was speechless. He looked at Nightingale's alchemy room and asked, "Won't she come today?" "She hasn't come at this time. I guess she won't come." Viper casually said. Dean said, "Can I borrow her alchemy symbol book?" "This is up to you, but it's best not to touch her other alchemy materials." Dean nodded. He picked up Nightingale's alchemy symbol book and continued to memorize it. Although he had the super chip which stored the modern chemical system, which was much more advanced and perfect than the alchemy system of this era, but it didn't mean that it was backward. There were still many advantages to learn from the alchemy system. After all, this was the prototype of chemistry. Dean reviewed the alchemy symbol book that he had memorized yesterday, and then continued to memorize the alchemy symbol book. Another day passed by. At dusk, he left the alchemy room with Viper, Rat, and others. This time, Viper was the first to leave. Rat was the last to leave. They were responsible for filling the passage. They didn't feel at ease leaving this task to a newcomer. When Dean came outside, he once again saw Viper hiding next to him, trying to peep at him. He ignored it and walked a few laps in the direction he came from yesterday. On the third day, Dean continued to come to the alchemy room. Nightingale was also there. He borrowed the alchemy books and continued to memorize them. He was able to understand the experiments of Nightingale and others before he left the room. From the symbols engraved on the alchemy table, Dean could roughly guess what kind of experiment they were going to do. He quickly glanced at Nightingale's alchemy table. He saw a sun symbol, 2 water drop symbols, and a spoon symbol. He was surprised. Nightingale's ambition was quite big. She even wanted to directly study gold. Did she want to directly create the Philosopher's Stone? The fourth day, Dean came to the alchemy nest, as usual. Snake wasn't here today. Nightingale and Mouse were busy with their own things. Occasionally, Mouse would come out to ask Nightingale some questions. Nightingale's alchemy level was the highest. Don't you want to read today? Nightingale asked in a strange tone as she saw that Dean didn't borrow books from her. Duddian shook his head. No need. No need? Nightingale was surprised. What do you mean? Have you memorized it? Yes. Dean nodded slightly. I want to start learning how to do experiments. Nightingale understood and laughed. It seems that you have memorized a lot of alchemy symbols. How can you do experiments without memorizing alchemy symbols? If you want to do experiments, then you have to buy the materials yourself. Today I can lend you some on the premise that I have extra, but you have to return them to me tomorrow. Thank you. Dean was grateful in his heart. He looked up and glanced at the raw materials on the shelves. He saw several raw materials for making black gunpowder. These raw materials were also commonly used in other alchemy experiments. Black gunpowder was the first invention of his motherland in the old era. It had a great impact on the world. It originated from alchemy. In fact, alchemy was equivalent to alchemy in the East. It was more advanced than the West. I want this yellow phosphorus. Nightingale glanced at it and nodded. Okay, I happen to have more of this. Dean asked for some resin, red scale, and other raw materials. Then he cleaned up the small warehouse. At this time, he suddenly found a problem. There was no alchemy table. He was dumbfounded. This was not making black gunpowder. He already had a complete formula. He just needed to mix the raw materials together. He wanted to study the match, but he hadn't mastered the specific production method. The last time he looked at the black gunpowder formula in the chip, he saw some materials with similar characteristics, such as yellow phosphorus, red scale, and other materials. So he wanted to take this opportunity to study it himself. Match was not a technology, but in this era, it could greatly optimize the ignition tool. It was like the difference between an electric lamp and a candle. The reason why he wanted to study this was because he hadn't mastered the power of electricity, so he couldn't read the other high-tech modern products in the chip. Secondly, the industrial level of this world was too backward. It was futile to have the idea without the tools. The second reason was the last time he detonated the black gunpowder. He felt that ignition was a problem. The fire sickle was too inconvenient. He needed to repeatedly hit it with fire steel to create sparks to ignite the tinder. It was too fatal at the critical moment of the battle. Dean looked for Nightingale and curiously asked, "Where did you get the alchemy table? No one dared to sell this thing in the market." Nightingale was mixing raw materials. When she saw Dean looking for her, she froze for a moment and said, "I forgot to tell you about this. You go and find Mouse and see if he has time. If he has time, he will take you to the underground market to buy one. But the price is a bit expensive. You'd better prepare more money, at least 2 silver coins." Underground market? Dean was startled. He suddenly remembered that Roseyard's notes seemed to have mentioned this place. It was the underground market of the Dark Church. They had strongholds in various places. Dean immediately found Mouse and told him about the matter. Mouse didn't think much about it. He promised that he would take him there in the evening. Dean said goodbye to Nightingale and left the alchemy nest. He didn't know how Barton and others were doing after 3 days. He immediately hired a carriage and went to the slums. Dean came to a dilapidated square. He quickly found a secret code left by Barton and others. There was a smile on his face. He followed the code and soon found a remote shack. It was close to the slums where the refugees gathered. Dean came to the front of the shack. He heard Barton's surprised voice from the other shack. Dean was stunned. He saw Barton and others come out of the shack. He hadn't seen them for 3 days. They were much more energetic than before. "We were afraid that the secret code would be exposed, so we rented another shack." Barton looked at Dean's expression and immediately explained. Chapter 94. Barton was relieved as he saw that Duddian didn't care about the wasted money. "We have been looking everywhere for the past few days, but haven't found anything suitable. Crone went out again today and hasn't come back yet." Duddian nodded. He was quite happy to see that all of them were here. In fact, he had given each of them a gold coin as a test. After all, the value of a gold coin was extremely high. Even ordinary poor people would not hesitate to rob and kill. However, Barton and the others didn't leave with the gold coin. It showed that they were determined to work for him. Moreover, Dadian was very satisfied with the fact that they didn't open their eyes at the sight of money. Krona's been gone for a long time today. Will he encounter any trouble? Barry looked at the time and asked in a worried tone. Barton's face slightly changed as he looked at Barry's expression. No, he is very smart. Joseph nodded. Maybe he's found a place. Dadian looked at the surrounding environment. You can find a better place to live. You don't have to save money. I'll earn more if you don't have it. This place is very good. Barton laughed. It's much better than when I was a miner. At least we can occasionally see the sun. Moreover, the people who live here are poor, so they won't be targeted. Dadian didn't say anything as he saw this. Although Barton and the others were orphans, but the orphanage taught them some basic knowledge, especially how to protect themselves and not be hated by others. Although they were physically disabled, but their minds were extremely sharp. They were not inferior to those who were physically healthy. In fact, they were more shrewd and cautious than those who were physically healthy. Dean followed them into the shack. The area inside was very small. It didn't take long for them to chat inside. Crone came back from outside with 3 stacks of things wrapped in oiled paper. I brought back food for you. You must be starving. He was surprised when he saw Dean. Barton asked, Did you find an abandoned factory? Crone put down the things and shook his head. I didn't find a suitable one. There are a few factories to rent, but the place isn't remote enough. Moreover, the price is a bit high. Barton and the others were disappointed as they looked at Dadian with guilt. Dadian waved his hand. Don't worry about it. You eat first, and then slowly look for a place. It must be remote and hidden enough. The surrounding environment should be open. When Roland had asked them to do this, he hadn't intended to complete it so quickly. After all, the slums were vast, and it would be difficult to find a suitable place. No matter how clever Barton and the others were, they had never seen much of the world. Roland's main purpose this time was to train them. Barton and the others felt apologetic after hearing Dudian's words. After chatting with them for a while, Dean looked at the time and got up to say goodbye. He took the carriage back to the residential area and went to the alchemy nest. Nightingale didn't say anything as she saw Dadian return. She continued to be busy with her experiments. Dean looked at the gold powder on the table and asked, Are you going to make the Philosopher's Stone directly? Nightingale saw that Dadian was aware of this, so she didn't deliberately hide it. She shook her head. How is it possible? The Philosopher's Stone is our ultimate goal. Even a 5-star master alchemist can't make it. How can I research it? I just want to see the compatibility of gold. I want to see if I can mix gold with other metals to make precious metals. Alloy. Dadian was surprised. Nightingale was surprised. Alloy? That's a good name. My experiment will be called Alloy Experiment. Well, do you mind? Dadian lightly coughed. It's just a small matter. I don't mind. But are you going to use this alloy experiment to hit the meteorite badge? Well, if it's completed according to my guess, then I should be able to get it. Nightingale nodded. Dudian's heart was moved. The most famous alloy in the old era was aluminum alloy. But there was no gold in aluminum alloy. Moreover, gold was too rare. In addition to gold jewelry, other metal elements would be added to it. There were very few gold synthetic materials. It was far less widely used than aluminum alloy. Moreover, aluminum alloy was used in many heavy industrial products. But to make aluminum alloy, we need to electrolyze the metal. We need to have electricity first. Dadian felt helpless. This was the limitation of tools. Nightingale looked at Dadian. What is the direction of your experiment? Is it convenient for us to communicate? Me? Dadian thought for a moment. I'm studying electricity. Electricity? Nightingale looked at him. This is a bit difficult. My teacher is still exploring it. Are you not going to start with basic physical materials? Dadian knew that she was worried that he would bite off more than he could chew. In fact, this was the common problem of most alchemists. Some beginners even wanted to directly create the ultimate alchemy treasure, like the Philosopher's Stone. It was completely whimsical. However, he was not ignorant and fearless. He was not interested in general research. What he wanted to create needed the support of electricity. So electricity was the first problem he had to solve. Moreover, the postmodern world had proved that the penetration and help of electricity was extremely deep. If there was no electricity, then the entire human society would be paralyzed. In short, the existence of electricity was the division between the ancient era and the industrial era. It had great significance. Dudian shook his head and said that he would stick to his experiment. Nightingale saw this and no longer said anything. After all, it was not a good thing to interfere in other people's experiment. At this time, Mouse came out of the room. He saw Dudian and Nightingale. "What are you talking about?" "The problem of the experiment," Nightingale casually said. Mouse didn't ask much, but looked at Dudian. "Are you ready? I'll take you to the market. Come back early. Did you bring enough money?" "It should be enough," Dudian replied. Mouse nodded. "We will meet at 23 West Street. Do you know where it is? If not, then ask someone." "All right." Dudian nodded. Both of them left. Dudian had never heard of this place. He directly hired a carriage. Anyway, the carriage was charged according to the length of the road. He could afford to pay a few copper coins. Everything was based on efficiency. West Street was relatively remote. There were no shops on the street. There were only residential houses. So there were not many people here. The cold wind was blowing on the street. Dudian got off the carriage and covered his head with a robe. After paying the fare, he immediately put on a mask. He came to the front of the small building with the 23-foot sign. It seemed that no one had lived in the building for a long time. The lawn was full of fallen leaves, and no one was cleaning it. However, Dudian smelled 3 or 4 human scents in the small building. Suddenly, one of the scents disappeared. Dudian was startled. The smell seemed to have disappeared into thin air. It was as if the owner of the smell had suddenly left. He was puzzled but didn't rush into the small building. Instead, he waited near the door. It didn't take long for Mouse to come over wearing a mask. He looked at Dudian. "How come you came so early?" Dudian knew that Mouse should have come over. He was a bit surprised and moved. "I made you come all the way." Mouse waved his hand. "It's a small matter. We are companions. Let's go. I'll take you in." Then he came to the front of the small building and gently knocked on the door. Dudian noticed that Mouse knocked on the door with a certain frequency. 3 heavy and 2 light, 2 slow and 3 fast. Soon after the knock, the door opened. A figure shrouded in a black robe opened the door. He was wearing a snow-white mask. He indifferently looked at both of them. "Come in." Mouse went in first, and Dudian followed. After the two came in, the tall figure indifferently said, "Please show me your tattoo." Mouse lifted his wrist and revealed the black hook tattoo. Dudian opened the clothes on his chest and revealed the black cross tattoo. At this time, he suddenly felt that Mouse's tattoo also had some advantages. It was more convenient to verify identity. If it was tattooed on a special private part of the body, although it was not easy to be exposed, but it would be troublesome to verify each other. Fortunately, after getting the meteorite badge, he could show it. The tall figure glanced at them, but didn't say anything. He turned around and led the two into the small building. He took out a bottle from his arms. It was filled with orange water. "I'll help you eliminate the smell so that the hounds don't detect you." After that, he poured the orange water into his mouth and sprayed it towards Dean and the mouse, splashing it all over the floor. Dudian suddenly smelled that the smell of himself and Mouse had faded. "Go in." The tall figure pointed inside. Chapter 95. Behind the door was a basement passage. It was dark and deep. There was a lot of faint human odor floating out. Dean was surprised. He didn't expect the underground market to be so lively. He could identify hundreds of people based on the smell. Although the special potion could cover up the smell, but it couldn't completely eradicate it. "Come with me." Mouse led the way as he was very familiar with the place. Dean followed behind him. They went down the dark stairs. The copper lamps on the wall shone on them. Their shadows were very long. There was a 4 or 5 meter long corridor under the spiral stairs. There were black-robed guards stationed at the end of the corridor. Dean and Mouse came to the door. The black-robed guards opened the door. A mysterious and novel dark underground market was presented in front of them. This was a huge underground square. It was dimly lit, and the lights on the surrounding walls lit up the place like dancing elves. There were all kinds of stalls everywhere, as well as large-scale, simple shops. All kinds of novelty items were freely being sold here. Dadian was surprised as he didn't expect the underground market to be so big. It must be known that the people who could enter the underground market were alchemists, potioneers, and other staff of the Dark Church. There were more than 100 merchants selling things in front of him. As for the customers, they were all over the square. It was estimated that there were at least 300 people gathered here. It was the first time for Dean to see so many evil people of the Dark Church at the same time. There was a strange feeling in his heart. At this time, Mouse pointed to a direction and said, "There's an alchemy table. Come with me." Dean followed behind Mouse. Although the surrounding light was dim, he could see clearly from far away. It was a simple shop built on the square. It was slightly larger than the bookstalls next to it. There were rows of alchemy tables on the left side of the shop. There were various bottles and strange things on the right side of the shop. He even saw a black claw. He didn't know what it was from. "Boss," Mouse called out to the shop owner. "Let's see the alchemy table." The shop owner was tall and wore a dark red mask. He looked at Mouse and Dean. From their height and voices, he knew that they were two children. Most of them were alchemist apprentices or potioneers' apprentices. He was too lazy to say much. "Look at it yourself. Pick and pay." Mouse was obviously used to it. He pointed to an alchemy table made of birch and stone. "Hound, what do you think of this?" Dean looked at it. "Are the prices different?" Of course. Mouse was very experienced. He said, "This is the cheapest. Only 2 silver coins. It's enough for us junior apprentices." Of course, if you have money, you can also buy a higher grade one, for example. This one costs 4 silver coins. It has a storage slot. It's more convenient, and it's a lot better in both drawing water and igniting fire. And this one costs 7 silver coins. He pointed row by row, and his finger landed on the alchemy table at the top. "That one is amazing, and it costs 2 gold coins. It has an automatic fire plug, and it can automatically clean the potash. There are also 2 refining ponds, which are essential for some complicated laboratories." Dean glanced at it. It seemed to be made of brass. The material and appearance were more imposing and stable than the previous ones. However, he only had 1 gold coin on him, so he couldn't spend it all. "This one," Dean pointed to the one that cost 2 silver coins. The shop owner glanced at him. It seemed that he had expected it. "Pay and report the address. If it is in the residential area, I will deliver it to you by tomorrow evening." "They will help us deliver it?" Dean was surprised. The mouse smiled and said, "Of course, we can't carry such a big guy. Moreover, it's too easy to be exposed. They have a secret transportation channel that can transport it without anyone knowing. Even if you're a noble, they can still transport it for you. Of course, you have to cooperate." Dean was shocked. Dark Church's power had penetrated so deep. At this time, Mouse suddenly grabbed Dean and pulled him to the side. "Let me pass." Dean was stunned for a moment. Following his line of sight, he saw 2 figures coming from behind. A man and a woman wearing a crow mask came to the front of the shop. On their shoulders, there were dark golden hexagonal badges. It was the meteorite badge. Official alchemist. Dean immediately knew the reason why Mouse hurriedly stepped aside. Both of them were official alchemists, especially the tall one. He was wearing a meteorite badge with 3 small suns engraved on it. He was a 3-star alchemist. From Roseyard's notes, Dean learned about the division of alchemists, from apprentice to 5-star master alchemist. Every increase in star required a lot of alchemy points. It was often necessary to submit several experimental results in order to accumulate enough alchemy points. A 3-star alchemist was basically equivalent to a holy knight in the Holy Church. This was second only to the commander of the knights. Their status was extremely high. Even a noble family like the Mel family had to be polite to them. "Boss, do you have a good alchemy table?" At this moment, the 3-star alchemist said to the shop owner. His voice was low and hoarse. It was obvious that he deliberately lowered his voice. The shop owner saw the meteor badge on their shoulders, and his eyes turned cold. He quickly stepped forward and said, "Yes, a new badge just came out. They were made by Master Rawl himself. His war craftsman skills guarantee that you will be satisfied. This is it." He pointed to the alchemy table at the top. The three-star alchemist looked at the table and looked at the graceful figure next to him. What do you think? The woman's meteorite badge was 2 suns. She could be regarded as a big figure. She looked at the table and shook her head. It's too bad. There is no decomposition pond. There's also no thermal pond. That's true. The tall figure pondered for a moment and said, Then let's go look for it again. Forget it. The woman sighed. This market should be a monopoly. My experimental report has been submitted. I will soon receive a call from the top. Let's use this for now. The tall figure hesitated for a moment and helplessly said, Okay. The two immediately paid and bought the table from the shop owner. Dean and Mouse watched them leave and then retracted their gaze. Mouse sighed with emotion. We can't afford it, but they think it's too bad. Sure enough, we have too little contact. Alchemy is too profound. Unfortunately, they didn't talk much. Otherwise, we might have been enlightened from their conversation. Dudian was surprised. She said that the experimental report should be submitted to the Dark Church. Why didn't she wait for the experiment to be completed and then submit the results directly? Mouse shrugged and said, They want to get alchemy credits as soon as possible. Many alchemy warlocks are worried that their experiments will be researched by others in advance, so they submit their ideas first. If the evaluation is valuable, it will be converted into corresponding alchemy credits. Of course, there's another possibility. Some people suddenly have other experimental inspiration, but they are busy with the experiment at hand. They don't have the energy to do it, or they're too lazy to collect materials. So they will submit their own experimental report or experimental creative conjecture. If it is verified to be feasible, then they will be given alchemy points. Chapter 96. That's a good idea. Dean's eyes lit up. When it came to experimental conjectures, he believed that no one would dare to say that they were first. After all, he had seen the modern world. Airplanes, cannons, cars, and any other modern technological products could become experimental conjectures. Moreover, these conjectures could be 100% established. However, limited by the current industrial level, they couldn't be produced. Whether they could be recognized or not was a problem. It's not as simple as you think. Mouse noticed the change of expression on Dean's face. He shook his head and smiled. The submitted experimental conjectures need a complete derivation process. It's not a simple concept. It also needs a relatively perfect alchemy formula. After all, if the alchemy formula is wrong, then the conjecture is naturally just an empty idea, just like our illusory fantasies. Although with the improvement of alchemy, the magical things in the heart may become a reality one day, but at present there is no actual theory to support it. After all, it is just an unrealistic fantasy. Duddy nodded. He naturally knew this point. His father often said that the scientific truth needed a rigorous attitude and a whimsical heart. Experimental conjectures were based on the premise of experiments. They were not pure fantasies. Even the magical things in the old science fiction were based on certain scientific theories. They were not fantasies. However, after all, novels were just stories. They were mainly based on fantasy. They could not be regarded as experimental conjectures because the creator had not really carried out relevant experiments. It could be seen that it was not easy to submit a rigorous and qualified experimental conjecture. Nevertheless, Dean was still very excited. It was difficult for others, but for him, it was very simple. As long as he copied the contents of the super chip, he would be able to do it. After all, it was a genuine technology formula. However, the premise of all this was the problem of electricity. Dean's heart became more and more anxious. At this time, it was not early. Mouse took Dean to look at other stalls. He didn't find anything helpful for his experiment, so he left the dark underground market with Dean. It was getting dark outside. Gray clouds of radiation shrouded the sky, blocking the moonlight. It was almost curfew time. Dean and Mouse parted ways and went home. In the blink of an eye, another 3 days passed. After the alchemy table was transported to the alchemy nest, Dean began to study the production of yellow phosphorus matches. After 3 consecutive days of experiments, he had gained a lot and mastered the initial manufacturing method. In fact, making matches wasn't difficult. Just like black gunpowder, the formula was very simple, but in the early days, the birth of black gunpowder was entirely obtained from the accidental explosion of an alchemist's furnace. Before that, no one expected that the few materials would explode together. The birth of many great inventions often came from coincidence. 3 days later, it was time for Dean to report to the hunter headquarters. Jura and her husband were still living in the residential district. They didn't follow Dudian to the commercial district. They were not in a hurry. After all, they had been rooted here for many years. They had many acquaintances from their father's generation. They needed to spend some time to get to know them. Dean took the consortium's carriage to a remote suburb of the commercial district. The place was surrounded by mountains. There were several silent castles. The carriage stopped in front of one of the castles. Dean got off the carriage and looked at the castle and the gloomy environment in front of him. He didn't expect the hunter headquarters to be such a place. The atmosphere was so gloomy. It was a good match for the hunters who often lived outside the giant wall. "Please." The coachman jumped off the carriage and respectfully said to Dean. Dean followed him. The two came to a castle on the hillside. The door of the castle was gently opened, and a young man in a black suit came out. He looked at Dean with a smile and said, "Are you the newcomer Dean who came to report?" "Yes. Come with me." The young man in the black suit turned and entered the castle. After Dean entered, the door slowly closed. Along the gravel path, they came to the front hall of the castle. It was dim inside. There was an oil painting of a woman hanging on the wall. It was the same woman that Dean had seen on the top floor of the scavenger headquarters. Dean was slightly surprised and curious, but he didn't ask much. "Your identity has been registered for you. From the moment you come today, you have to fulfill your duties as a hunter of the Melon Consortium. The highest goal is to safeguard the interests of the consortium. Do you understand?" The young man in the black suit said to Dean. "Yes." Dean glanced at his shoulders. He didn't see any hunter's medal. He asked, "You are?" The young man in the black suit noticed Dean's eyes. He smiled and said, "I'm the deputy instructor of the trainee hunters. By the way, although you have magic marks, but you're still a trainee hunter. Compared to other excellent trainee hunters, you are not as strong as them. So from today on, you will receive consortium's training." "Consortium's training?" Dean was puzzled. "Isn't it the hunter school?" The young man in the black suit smiled. "I have heard about you. Originally, the consortium was going to arrange for you to go to the hunter school for training. But you have magic marks, so your physical fitness is higher than the others. Moreover, the hunter school is a unified training. It is impossible to give you a double standard. The consortium doesn't have enough power to make them give you face. So now you can't go to the hunter school. You can only receive the consortium's training. But you don't have to worry. The consortium's training content is basically the same as the hunter school. Moreover, you should have thought about your future career. You only need to carry out the special training. Of course, you still have to understand the specialties of other positions, so that in the future when we go out hunting, we can have a better tacit understanding." Dean saw that there was nothing to say. Since the top had decided, he could only do it. "What is your career?" "Hunter. Long-range output. The consortium is currently lacking hunters. However, there are not many people with archery talent. I hope you have a good talent in this area. Otherwise, it will be difficult to go to the peak based on interest." The young man in the black suit said. Dean thought of his previous shooting results. He couldn't help but feel nervous. "Let's test your talent in all aspects." The young man in the black suit smiled and said, "Come with me to the training ground." He pushed open the door to the inner hall of the front hall. Behind it was a very open space. There were a variety of training props, such as archery targets, wooden figurines, rocking wooden horses, and a cage full of sharp swords. Dean was a little sweaty. "Since you have chosen to be a hunter, let's test your archery talent first." The young man in the black suit stood in front of the target and waved to Dean, motioning him to come over. Chapter 97. Dudian came to the front of the target. "Here, shoot a few arrows." The youth took out a black bow and quiver from the shelf next to him and encouraged him. Dean reached out and took it. He felt that the weight was slightly lighter than the hunter's bow, but for most scavengers, it was still extremely heavy. He immediately took out a common arrow and put it on his back. He pulled the string and aimed at the target in the distance. The target was about 30 meters away. With a swoosh, the arrow flew forward and nailed itself deeply into the target. However, it did not hit the bullseye. It was off by 1.5 rings. Not bad. Have you practiced before? The youth looked at it and was slightly surprised. Dudian nodded. I have practiced for a few days. Just a few days. The young man nodded slightly and handed over a black bandage. He said, cover your eyes and shoot another arrow. Dudian nodded. He blindfolded and pulled the bow again. His mind searched for the approximate position of the previous target, although he could smell the faint smell of the target, but he didn't rely on it. He wanted to see whether he had the talent of an archer or not. Whoosh! The arrow was shot out. With a thud, the arrow was nailed into the target. Dudian pulled down the black band and looked at the target. The position was similar to the previous one. It seems that you have the talent of an archer. There was a smile on the youth's face as he said, although your physique is high, but it's extremely rare to have such a result after a few days of training. If you work hard, then you may have the opportunity to become the second intermediate hunter in the consortium. Dudian was surprised. Is there only one hunter in the consortium who has reached the intermediate level? Well, there are a total of 8 intermediate hunters in the consortium. 2 knights, 3 warriors, 2 thieves, and 1 hunter. The youth smiled. There are few hunters. The main reason is that their individual combat ability is too poor. If there is no one to help them, it is difficult to hunt the prey. They rely too much on the team. Moreover, the hunter's skills are relatively difficult. This is the reason why intermediate hunters are rare. Hunter's individual combat ability is poor. Dudian couldn't help but look at him. He chose the hunter profession because of its individual combat ability. In his opinion, it was the strongest individual profession. However, he did agree with the fact that hunter skills were harder to learn. After all, warriors and knights were always fighting monsters on the front lines, so their combat skills would improve very quickly. On the other hand, hunters were only responsible for shooting arrows repeatedly from the back, so they could only gain very little insight and could only rely on practice makes perfect. Let's try the talents of other professions. The youth took Dean to the second drawing area. There were several wooden dolls. There were all kinds of swords, whips, hammers, and other weapons of different lengths on the shelves. However, there was no spear. The spear was the exclusive symbol of the knight. Attack the wooden puppet and smash it to pieces. Use whatever weapon is convenient for you, the young man said with a smile. Dudian nodded. He picked up the sword and came in front of a wooden figure. He used all the ways he could think of to hack it. The repeated slashes made him feel awkward and uncomfortable. The blade would slip if he used too much force. Dudian knew that a sword was not suitable for him, so he switched to a dagger. Compared to a sword, a dagger was much more convenient. It was longer than a dagger and could be used like a dagger. He liked it very much. He didn't feel tired even if he continued to hack. Next were other weapons, whips, hammers, knives. Dudian tried them one by one. In the end, he felt that he was more comfortable with a dagger and a knife. The youth also gave such an evaluation based on his results. Your warrior talent is also good, but a hunter is better. Let's look at your knight talent. The youth said. The knights here were different from the knights inside the giant wall. Although the fighting style was similar, the knights inside the giant wall paid more attention to moral character. They would go through a strict assessment before being awarded a knight medal. But they were purely fighting outside the giant wall. Everything was based on strength. Dudian was sitting on a rocking wooden horse, holding a spear and constantly waving it. He felt extremely uncomfortable. The youth looked at him and shook his head. He let Dudian carry out the last test. The core of a thief was hiding and evading. The way of the test was a large cage full of swords and guns. The cage would constantly shake, and the swords and guns inside would constantly shake. There was no rule. It was completely decided by the reaction speed of the individual nerves. Change into this. The youth handed Dudian a set of heavy black iron armor. Dudian immediately put on and felt his actions were clumsy. After entering the iron cage, the young man pressed the mechanism, and the iron cage immediately shook. The swords and sabers inside were like countless soldiers surrounding and suppressing him, stabbing at him in a disorderly manner. Dudian hurriedly dodged left and right. His eyes quickly swept left and right. Occasionally, he caught a glimpse of silver light from the corner of his eyes. He quickly bowed his head to dodge. His body's instinctive reaction was extremely sensitive. As he dodged for a long time, he soon grasped a certain pattern from the shaking of his feet. Nevertheless, there were still 2 or 3 spears that stabbed his body. But he was protected by the black iron armor, so he wasn't injured. Soon, the test was over. The youth opened the cage. His face was full of amazement. "Gee, I didn't expect you to be so agile. Although your physique is relatively high, but to have such a reaction speed is too strong. You can become a thief. Your talent in this aspect will definitely allow you to reach the level of intermediate hunter as soon as possible. After so many years in the consortium, your talent as a thief is definitely in the top 3. No, the top 2. Dudian didn't expect to get such an evaluation. His heart was happy, but after thinking about it, he still said, "I still like to be a hunter. I can kill the enemy from thousands of meters away." Okay. The youth sighed regretfully. He didn't insist. After all, this was just a simple test. It could roughly see some talent. It was not completely accurate. Many people were not good at the beginning, but later they became more skilled than those who were good at the beginning. He had seen several such examples. Moreover, interest was a very key in boring skill practice. This was why the consortium didn't force a profession, but let the hunters choose their own. Although your talent as a hunter and thief is very high, but don't be arrogant and complacent. You have to train well. The consortium doesn't give you much time. Strive to become a real hunter within a year. The youth earnestly said, "Although your learning time is only 1/3 of the other trainee hunters, but you have mastered the magic marks. Your physique has been enhanced in all aspects, so it will be easier to learn. After a year, if you don't pass the skills assessment, the consortium will force you to go outside the giant wall so that you can hone your skills in actual combat. However, you should also understand the dangers outside the giant wall. So work hard. If you're lazy today, you will lose your life tomorrow." Dudian nodded. "I know." Chapter 98. The hunter training ground was located on the other side of the river behind the castle. There was a very wide grassland. At the moment, there were 5 figures standing on one side of the grassland. They were pulling bows and shooting arrows. The targets were 100 meters away from each other. The 5 of them consisted of 4 men and 1 woman. Each of them was served by 2 people dressed like servants, either passing them arrows or serving them tea. At this time, the youth came to the field and clapped his hands. The 5 people suddenly stopped and looked over. "I'm going to introduce you to a new companion or future senior." The youth smiled and pointed to Dean. "His name is Dean. He will train with you from today." The 5 people suddenly looked at Dean. Their first impression was that he was handsome, and the second was that he was quiet. "Instructor, he is a newcomer. How can he be our senior?" One of the pale-skinned teenagers frowned. The youth smiled and said, "Dean used to be a scavenger. He accidentally got magic marks. He is already a veritable hunter. What he lacks is professional skills. He will study here for a year and will graduate. In the future, he will naturally be your senior unless you can complete your training before he graduates." The 5 people were surprised, including the pale-skinned teenager. They could not help but look at Dean a few times. The youth took Dean to an empty shelf and said, "This is your position. In view of your hunter's physique, today's training is to shoot a bronze bow 1,000 times. You will finish when you finish. Don't think about dragging it until tomorrow. Otherwise, you will never have dinner." Dudian nodded, indicating that he understood. He had seen the cruelty outside the giant wall. The purpose of his training was not simply to complete the task, but to improve himself. No matter how many tasks the young instructor set, he would exhaust himself to the extreme. The distance of each arrow must exceed the line below the target position. In the first 7 days, you will not be required to hit the target with 100 arrows, but the number of arrows must not be less than 1,000. The young instructor changed his previous easygoing attitude and said in a cold and serious tone. Dean nodded. Apparently, the young instructor had already made arrangements. There were 2 servants standing in front of the vacant shelf. The young instructor waved his hand. One of the servants struggled to hand over the bow and arrows to Dean. Dean took the bow. It was heavy. It was similar to the previous talent test. But for him, it was nothing. He immediately aimed at the target position and began to shoot. The young instructor looked at Dudian for a while and felt bored. He said to Dudian, "If you need anything, just tell them. They're the servants responsible for your training." Dean nodded slightly and continued to draw the bow and arrows. The initial training for a hunter was to repeatedly shoot arrows to improve the accuracy of their arrows. After all, this was a hunter's main method of attack. When they were hunting with their companions, it was very common for a hunter to make a mistake, resulting in the death of their companions under the claws of monsters. Therefore, the hunter's requirement for accuracy was almost insane. There was a 13 or 14-year-old boy next to Dudian. He curiously looked at Dudian while shooting arrows. He wanted to see how powerful a real hunter with magic marks was. Soon, the teenager was disappointed. Dean's archery level was worse than his. More than 10 arrows had not hit the target at a distance of 100 meters. All of them missed the target, but the distance was quite far. It seems that a hunter is nothing more than a strong physique. There is nothing special. The teenager thought in his heart. He no longer paid attention to Dean and continued his archery training. Dean repeatedly shot an arrow. After shooting dozens of arrows, he gradually felt that he had mastered some of the feeling of shooting, such as the angle of aiming, the approximate deviation from the actual position, and the change of angle caused by the strength of the shooting force. In the old era, it was extremely difficult to shoot a target of 100 meters. But the physique of Dean and the 5 apprentice hunters was not that of ordinary people in the old era. Needless to say, these 5 apprentice hunters could pull such a heavy bow. Naturally, they had received God's blessing. It must be known that the heavier the bow, the greater the strength. The advantage of the strength, in addition to being able to shoot farther, would also be higher accuracy. The fundamental principle of the closer the shot was, the easier it was to hit the target. Ordinary people's hunting bow will weaken after shooting for 50 meters. The arrow will slide down due to the influence of the airflow. But for my heavy bow, 80 meters is like 10 meters. The arrow is still flying at full strength. In other words, the stronger the tension of the bow, the farther the shot will be. It seems that I have to get a good bow in the future. Dean explored the feeling of shooting and also thought about his future plans. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He kept shooting arrows. His movements were single and repeated. When the arrows in the basket were used up, the servant next to him would help him reload. After shooting 200 arrows, Dean's hit rate had significantly improved. Basically, 2 out of 10 arrows would hit the target. After all, his physique was high. Once he became proficient, the hit rate would rapidly increase. However, hitting the target was just the beginning. If he wanted to go further, the difficulty would increase tenfold. When the teenager next to him was resting, he inadvertently caught a glimpse of Dean's target. He was stunned for a moment. There were more than 30 arrows stuck on the target. In this short time, he only shot 160 arrows. Even if Dean was faster than him, the gap was not big. In this way, the hit rate was not low. Although it could not be compared with him, at least it was hopeful to meet the young instructor's training requirements. Change the target, Dean said. A servant immediately put on a black armor and carefully ran over to change the new target. After changing the target, Dean continued to pull the bow and shoot. With a sound, the arrow hit the target. Dean shot another arrow, and with a sound, it hit the target again. Dean continued to shoot. Soon, 5 out of 10 arrows hit the target, although 3 arrows were at the outermost edge of the target and almost missed the target. But the result was already considered good. Dean thought of the undead outside the giant wall. He narrowed his eyes and regarded the target as a standing undead. He used the red heart as its head and pulled the bow and arrow to shoot continuously. After shooting 400 arrows in a row, Dean felt that his arm was extremely sore. He had to stop and rest. After his arm recovered a little, he continued to shoot. Soon, it was dusk and the sun was setting. Dean had shot 800 arrows. After shooting 500 arrows, his hit rate had declined. His arms were sore and swollen, making it impossible for him to maintain stability. The rest of the archery was purely an exercise for his arms and the feeling of shooting. At this time, the next 5 trainee hunters had completed their respective tasks. They were tired and panting. After saying goodbye to Dean, they left. Dean stood in front of the sunset. His face was dripping with hot sweat. He gritted his teeth and kept shooting. Every time his arm was sore, there would be a voice in his heart that kept persuading him to stop and rest. At this moment, he would deliberately think of the undeads outside the wall, the ferocious appearance, and the feeling of helplessness when being chased. Then the blood in his heart would surge, and he would continue to shoot. Inertia was inborn, but persistence was his own choice. Chapter 99. The sky was getting dark. Dean was still pulling the bow and shooting arrows. Every time he pulled the bow, it was extremely strenuous and even painful, but he still shot the arrows one by one. 2 servants stood next to him and looked at each other. They had replaced 57 quiver of arrows for Dean. Each quiver had 20 arrows, so it had already exceeded the number of 1,000 arrows. Elder, your 1,000 arrows task has been completed. One of the servants hesitated for a moment, but still interrupted Dean's training and said. Dean gasped and said, I know, continue to change the arrows. After that, he continued to pull the bow. When he was too tired to pull the bow, he took a short break to recover and then continued to shoot arrows. Until around 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, Dean was completely tired and could no longer pull the bow. He had to stop and ask the young servant next to him, How many arrows? 1,290 arrows. The servant quickly replied. Dean gasped and thought, 10 more arrows to reach the round number. His obsessive-compulsive disorder was playing tricks in his heart. He planned to go back to rest, but now he was serious. Soon, after intermittent rest and shooting arrows, Dean spent a quarter of an hour to make up 10 arrows. He was satisfied and ready to leave. At this time, the young instructor came from the distance and saw Dean next to the shelf. He was surprised. Not finished yet. It's done. Dean gasped. The young instructor looked at the 2 servants next to him and saw them nodding slightly. He knew that Dean was not fooling him. He smiled. Go back and rest. These 1,000 arrows are based on your physique. When others first came here, they were tired with 300 arrows a day. Now, they can only achieve 800 arrows a day. After all, your physical strength is much higher than theirs. 1,000 arrows is your starting point. We will continue to gradually increase your training volume. Don't neglect or be lazy, understand? Dean nodded. Go back and have a good rest. The young instructor waved. Dean handed the bow to the servant and turned away from the lawn. He was so tired that his arms were still slightly trembling. The place to sleep at night was a nearby castle for trainee hunters. All the trainee hunters were privately trained by the consortium. Dean came to the front hall to have dinner. He had to say that the life of the hunter special training was completely different from that of the scavengers. The scavengers were thoroughly trained. They lived in poor conditions and ate poor food. They were trained to adapt to the living conditions outside the giant wall. But hunters were different. As long as they completed their tasks every day, they would be able to enjoy other aspects of material enjoyment. There was a specially hired chef waiting for them at any time, and they could order whatever they wanted. As long as they completed the task before 9 p.m., they could eat as much as they wanted. Dean arrived at 8:45. He ordered a pan-fried blood steak and a foie gras. Both of these were poultry raised in the giant wall. The effect of nuclear radiation was relatively shallow, so the degree of mutation wasn't obvious. After generations of reproduction, the definition had changed from mutation to evolution. It belonged to non-polluting poultry and was the favorite food of the aristocracy. After eating, Dean went back to the room arranged by the young instructor to sleep. The room was independent and very spacious. It was a rare enjoyment for Dean, who was used to living a hard life. The night passed quickly. The next day, he got up on time and came to the hall under the castle. He saw a lot of people who were almost the same age as him. One of them was the trainee hunter that he had trained with yesterday. "Good morning." The teenager saw Dudian and calmly greeted him. "My name is Tersan. I heard that you came back very late last night. The first day must have been very hard for you. I can't believe that I gave you 1,000 arrows training. You are worthy to be the one who got the magic marks. You can even complete such a terrible requirement." Dean politely said, "You will get the magic mark in the future." The teenager smiled and didn't say anything. He said goodbye to Dean and went to the side to get his breakfast. Dean also went to the queue and asked for his own breakfast. After eating, he moved his arms. After a night of recovery, there was still some sore feeling. He knew that today's practice would be more difficult. After eating breakfast, Dean came to the lawn. At the moment, the other 5 people hadn't arrived yet. The servants also hadn't arrived yet. Dean didn't pay attention to them and began to practice. After shooting 100 arrows, he saw the other 5 people coming. The young instructor's training was very free. As long as the task was completed on the day, no matter how long the training was, he could arrange his own time. After the 5 people arrived, they greeted each other and began to train. A single training course in day-after-day life was extremely boring for a child of Dean's age. But Dean was very patient since childhood. He had seen the destruction of the world and the cruelty outside the giant wall. This made his thirst for power stronger. This desire surpassed all other interests of fun. In the blink of an eye, another day passed. The young instructor came to see them several times. He guided them on the basic posture of archery and the roll of the shoulders, arms, and other parts of the body. Then he left. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Dean was so tired that his arms cramped and had to stop. Today's task was barely up to 1,200 arrows, 100 less than yesterday's. The main reason was that yesterday's overdraft was too big, and the after effects of arm soreness had affected today. Dean dragged his body back to the castle. After dinner, he went back to the room and fell asleep. The next 3rd and 4th day, Dean went back at 8 o'clock in the evening, as usual. On the 3rd day, the number of arrows shot skyrocketed to 1,500 arrows. The sore feeling in his arms had gradually adapted after the night's rest. On the 4th day, the number of arrows shot had reached 1,600 arrows. In the high-intensity training, Dean's body was also adjusting and adapting quickly. The 5 people who trained with Dean all felt the progress of Dean's archery. The hit rate was almost twice as high as before. Almost every 10 arrows, only 1 or 2 arrows would miss the target, and the rest would all hit the target. Of course, this was the probability of the first few hundred arrows. The more the arrows, the lower the hit rate. It was negligible. Even so, the 5 people were surprised by such progress in just a few days. However, thinking that Dean was a hunter who had mastered magic marks, his physique was several times higher than theirs. Such amazing progress could be explained. Nevertheless, the 5 people were still somewhat unconvinced. Even if they were facing a hunter who had mastered magic marks, they didn't want to be quickly overtaken by a newcomer. So in the next few days, they were more serious about their attitude when shooting. Instead of shooting casually like before, they just hoped that the arrows could fly over the target. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. Dean had increased the number of arrows shot every day to 1,800. Now that you have adapted, from today on, the number of arrows you shoot every day will increase to 1,500 arrows. The young instructor said coldly and harshly. Moreover, the number of arrows that hit the target must reach 300. Dean nodded and didn't say anything. In fact, the number of arrows he had hit the target had reached about 500 almost double the task set by the young instructor. However, he didn't care about the task given by the young instructor. His goal was to surpass himself and squeeze himself to the limit. Chapter 100. The hard training continued. In the blink of an eye, another 7 days had passed. The young instructor seemed to use 7 days as a phase. On the 8th day of archery training, he once again set a new task target for Dean. The number of arrows per day had increased by 100. He needed to complete 1,600 arrows, and 400 of them must hit the target. This time, he didn't directly increase the number of arrows by 500. Perhaps he considered that there was a limit to his physique. According to the young instructor's assessment, it would be very difficult for Dean to complete 1,500 arrows with his physique. It would be extremely difficult for him to increase the number of arrows by 100. 2,000 arrows was basically the limit of Dean's physical strength. His assessment was based on a variety of information and was very accurate. However, he did not know that when he set this task target, Dean had increased the number of arrows to 2,080. Moreover, this record was immediately broken on the second day, reaching 2,112 arrows. The more time passed, the slower the number of arrows Dean could shoot. His physical strength had already reached the limit or even broke through the limit. Moreover, his hit rate had reached 700 arrows. In other words, he could continuously and steadily shoot 700 arrows. This was absolutely a terrible level, and it meant that he had really entered the door of archery. However, it was just the door. After all, the target was static and the target area was relatively large. If he wanted to accurately hit a smaller bullseye range, the difficulty would be even greater. In the blink of an eye, another half a month passed. On the hunter training ground, whoosh, 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 the arrows flew out continuously, and the arrows hit the target. Out of 3 arrows, 1 arrow hit the bullseye. Dean's movements were stable. Yesterday's tired and sore arms had almost recovered after a night's rest. His body had fully adapted to such high-intensity training. When he shot 200 arrows, the other 5 people came to the training ground one after another. In this month of archery training, Dean's rapid progress had made the 5 people sit up and take notice of him. However, thinking that Dean was a hunter with magic marks, the 5 people's hearts were both envious and somewhat jealous. Not long after the 5 people arrived, the young instructor also came. In addition to the release of task indicators, his expression was very easygoing. He chuckled to Dudian. Today is the first month of training. The number of arrows you shoot every day has reached 2,000. Even if you have reached the limit, you have completed the target I gave you on time. I believe that your arm strength is now very stable. Dean stopped and looked at him. Next, it's time to teach you the first archery skill of a beginner hunter. Once you've mastered it, you'll be considered a qualified archer. The young instructor smiled and picked up another black bow and quiver from a shelf. He pulled out a dark arrow and put on the bow. Look carefully. This is called rapid arrow. As soon as he finished speaking, he loosened his fingers and the tendon string shot out. With a swoosh, the arrow shot through the air and nailed itself on the target, hitting the bullseye. As Dean looked back at the young instructor, he heard a sound coming from the target. He couldn't help but look at the target and saw 2 arrows nailed in the bullseye. You didn't see it clearly. The young instructor smiled and said, "The so-called rapid-fire arrow refers to the rapid shooting of the arrows without pause. The difficulty of this move lies in its stability and speed. The 2 arrows must be shot in a line so that it can cause the greatest damage. If you encounter a monster with a strong defense, the first arrow will tear through its scales, the second arrow will pierce through its flesh and bones, and the third arrow will take its life." Dean looked at it and nodded. "I know. You have just learned it. I'll give you half a month to master 2 consecutive shots." The young instructor's face was cold and solemn. "If you haven't mastered it by then, you'll get a hellish training." Dean nodded slightly to show that he understood. Remember, the key to this move is stability. At the same time, the speed of drawing and loading the arrow must be fast, accurate, and stable. The young instructor instructed. As he spoke, he quickly loaded the arrow and shot 2 arrows consecutively, both hitting the bullseye. This time Dean saw it clearly. The speed of the arrow was so fast that it was like a shadow. Almost as soon as the first arrow was shot, the second arrow was already on the bullseye. His hand speed was amazing. Under the watchful eyes of the young instructor, Dean also began to practice. Soon, he felt the difficulty. The first was to draw the arrow. When he touched the quiver on his back, he might not be able to catch the arrow at the first time. Occasionally, he would catch the arrow, but because of the wrong gesture or the wrong position, the speed would slow down and he couldn't shoot continuously. The young instructor watched him practice for a while, told him, "Practice well." Then he turned and left. Dudian practiced repeatedly. Another day passed. He was completely immersed in the process of quickly shooting and quickly shooting. When the servant reminded him at 8 o'clock in the evening, he came back to his senses and subconsciously asked, "How many arrows have you shot today?" 2,530 arrows. The servant said. Dean was a little surprised. Since 3 days ago, the number of arrows he shot had been stable at about 2,350 arrows. Today he unexpectedly increased by 180 arrows in one breath. It must be known that his physical strength had long reached the limit. "I'm too into it, so I don't feel tired." Dean woke up and suddenly saw the blisters on his fingers. Water and blood flowed out. He immediately wrapped his clothes and went back to eat. The next day, Dean came early as usual and continued to practice rapid arrow. The more times he practiced, the more Dean understood rapid arrow. However, with the understanding, he gradually rejected this archery. Rapid arrow shooting, although 2 or even 3 arrows in a row are very lethal, but the shortcomings are also very obvious. The rapid shooting will lead to the weakening of the power of each arrow. The real damage caused by 3 arrows is at most equal to 1.5 arrows. Dean thought in his heart, "If I can kill with 1 arrow, why do I need 3 arrows? It's better to practice the previous arrow." Although the speed is slow, but the hunter's fighting style is to ambush and shoot. As long as I can kill with 1 arrow, it's fine. Moreover, people's energy is limited. It takes too long to practice rapid arrow. It's better to concentrate on learning. He decided to go to the extreme. Anything that reached the pinnacle would be terrifying. Whether it was speed is unbreakable or strength to defeat 10. It was a kind of extreme. Although the rapid arrow looked good, fancy, and seemed powerful, Dean felt that it was not worth wasting energy to learn it. He wanted to practice the most destructive archery, and it was best to be able to kill with 1 arrow. Thinking of this, Dean gave up practicing rapid arrow and continued to repeat the previous basic archery. However, this time he did not blindly pursue quantity, but thought about how to make the destructive power greater. Chapter 101. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. In the repeated archery training, Dean's accuracy had increased rapidly. Almost every arrow could hit the target before his arms lost control and trembled. 7 out of 10 arrows could hit the bullseye. For an ordinary person, it would take at least 3 to 5 years of hard training to achieve such results. But with Dean's hunter's physique, in just 2 months or so, he had completed such rapid progress. Of course, this was inseparable from his extreme training day and night. In addition to accuracy, almost all of Dean's arrows penetrated the target, and the lethality was significantly improved. However, his rapid arrows did not make the slightest progress. When the young instructor came to check his results, he was immediately angry. You have learned to this level in half a month? The posture of pulling the arrow is so ugly. It's too negligent. Don't think that you are a hunter because you have magic marks. When you really go outside the giant wall to hunt, you can only hunt some low-level monsters that scavengers can kill. The young instructor angrily announced, "Since you can't even learn the rapid arrows and like to be lazy from tomorrow onwards, you will practice basic archery for a month. Do you know your mistake?" Dean thought it would be a hellish punishment, but he didn't expect it to be basic archery. His heart couldn't help but smile, and his joy was slightly revealed from the corner of his mouth. Such an indifferent appearance made the young instructor even more furious. So in the next month, the young instructor greatly increased the number of arrows that Dean had to shoot every day. It suddenly increased to 2,200 arrows. In his view, such overload training had completely exceeded Dean's physical fitness. If he did not reach the target on time, there would be no dinner. Without dinner, the next day's training would be slower. In this way, he would fall into a vicious cycle. Every day, he would face an overload of training. It would make a person overtired and even collapse. This could greatly temper the willpower. This was also the purpose of the young instructor's training. Although it was a punishment, but the consortium style was based on profit. It was not what the consortium wanted. So although it was a punishment, it was mainly to improve one of Dean's abilities. Dean's number of arrows had already reached the level of 2,800 arrows. The super high standard set by the young instructor had been easily exceeded. He continued to immerse himself in his own understanding of archery. Outside the giant wall, Melon Consortium Area No. Unlike the other areas under the jurisdiction of the Melon Consortium, there were almost no broken high-rise buildings and metal wreckage everywhere. This area was extremely empty, like a vast wilderness. There were no weeds. Occasionally, you could see broken and collapsed highways that were covered with thick moss and dust. This showed that this area was once an urban area. However, there was not a single complete building in sight. Broken stones and bloodstains were everywhere, and corpses were rarely seen. The bloodstains turned into pale red water under the washing of the calamity rain, flowing to every corner of the crevice. When they dried up, they became natural and beautiful patterns, branded on the ground. At this moment, beside a pile of corpses, 5 figures appeared like ghosts. They quietly leaned against the wall and looked at the broken street beside the wall. There were 2 half-foot deep dents in the ground, about a meter long. There was a pile of black filth next to the dent, giving off a pungent smell. If one looked closely, one could see some bone residue and corroded metal in the filth. One of the figures quietly stepped forward, picked up a stone, and poked the lump of dirt. He saw that it was soft and mushy. He immediately came back and whispered, "From the degree of dryness, it should be less than 2 hours since it left here." "Chase," one of them said. The 5 moved quickly and quietly along the huge dents in the ground to catch up. After a quarter of an hour, one of them suddenly gestured for them to stop. The man lowered his voice and said in a dignified tone, "I smell it. It's 3 o'clock in front of us. It should be about 8 kilometers away from us." "Very good. You prepare to ambush them from behind. The 4 of us will go," one of the leaders said excitedly. The first man nodded, but his face suddenly changed. He hurriedly said, "Not good. Quickly hide." Puff! From the ground under the feet of the few people, several sharp claws jumped out. One of them pierced through the back of the man who had just spoken. Hunter HQ, an old castle by the Nile River. A letter was sent by a black crow from the window and fell on the table. When he saw the red mark on the bottom left corner of the envelope, West, who was enjoying his afternoon tea with the help of a maid, narrowed his eyes. He could not be bothered to continue eating and drinking leisurely. He quickly pushed away the charming maid and sat in front of his desk. With a grave expression, he quickly opened the envelope. Traces of the Black Weaver appeared in Area Number 1 and killed 3 hunters. When West saw the contents of the report, his face couldn't help but change. He hurriedly looked at the situation. The 6th team was attacked by the Black Weaver while they were tracking the mountain lion. Only the captain and 1 team member escaped with serious injuries. Finally couldn't bear to come out. Damn beast. West held the letter tightly. The next moment, he quickly took out the letter and put it back into his envelope. He hung the letter on the feet of the black crow. He patted the black crow's feathers. "Go to Glenn." The black crow shook its wings and flew out of the window. Hunter training ground. Dean was training as usual. He was constantly pulling and shooting arrows. His accuracy was getting sharper and sharper. He even wanted to find a moving target to practice. Suddenly, the young instructor came to the training ground in a hurry. He found Dean and handed him a letter. This is an emergency sign given to you by the consortium. There's a situation outside the giant wall. There's a temporary lack of free hunters. You have filled in the fear of Stain's ability. The consortium wants you to go outside the giant wall to perform an urgent task. Hurry up and prepare. Dean could not help but stop. But I'm still in training. This is an emergency sign. As long as you're not performing other tasks outside the giant wall and can't be contacted, you have to put down all your work and respond to the consortium summons. The young instructor spoke quickly. Your hunter armor has been ordered. It will be sent to you soon. Stop and don't waste your stamina. Go and replenish your energy. Someone will come to pick you up and take you outside the giant wall. So urgent? Dean quickly put down the bow. He didn't want to waste his physical strength. Is there no other resting hunter? Chapter 102. What is the urgent task? Is it dangerous? Dean couldn't help but ask. The young instructor replied, I heard that there is a rare monster that has been given a name. It is a bit dangerous, but the team that will go with you is led by Glenn, one of the two strongest hunters of the consortium. You're only responsible for tracking the smell. They will protect you as long as you don't fall behind. Rare monster? Dean thought about the consortium's evaluation of the Defiler. Was a monster of the same level? He immediately asked, Can I go to the residential area first? Of course not. The young instructor didn't think. It is an emergency. Time is very tight. Come with me to the hall of the hunting castle. The others should have already arrived. He grabbed Dean's hand and ran away. Dean was anxious. He didn't have time to configure black gunpowder for self-defense. He was unavoidably worried because he was barehanded in his newly learned archery skills. Soon, under the young instructor's lead, the two of them crossed the river and came to the castle on the other side of this territory that was leaning against the mountain ridge. This castle was completely black, like a black evil beast crawling on the ground, full of a gloomy atmosphere. The young instructor took Dean to the front of the castle and said, Go in. They are waiting for you inside. I will prepare some dry food for you. Dean thanked him in his heart. After the instructor left, he turned around and took a deep breath to enter the castle. The guards at the door didn't stop him and opened a giant door for him. The front hall of the castle was dimly lit. There were 6 figures, 4 men and 2 women. They were talking about something when they heard the sound of the door opening. Is this the little guy? One of them asked. Another youth said, I heard that he is a lucky scavenger rookie. Most likely it is him. At this time, a slim figure came out of the crowd. It was a beautiful woman in her early 20s. She was wearing a tight-fitting black hunter's armor. She glanced at Dean and said, Immediately put on your armor and get ready to go. Dean suddenly felt that the woman was somewhat familiar. He suddenly remembered that when he had just become a scavenger, he was invited to the aristocratic banquet. He had seen 2 hunters, and this woman was one of them. Presumably, she and the youth were the 2 strongest hunters of the consortium. No wonder the aristocrats would take the initiative to greet them. Their attitude was extremely friendly, including the people of Mel's main family. Yes, Dean glanced around and saw a pile of black armor on the chair next to him. He trotted over and opened it. The size was consistent with his height. It should be prepared for him. In addition to the armor, there was a black bow. Dean carried the bow and quiver on his back and said to the woman, I'm ready. Yes. The woman nodded slightly as she saw Dean was so efficient. She said to the others, This time the black weaver has appeared. We must try our best to catch it. We can't let it slip away again. Once we are outside the giant wall, all of you stay alert. Do you hear me? Yes. The other 5 stood at attention and shouted. Glenn nodded and waved her hand. Let's go. He pushed open the front door and came to the stable next to the castle. There were more than 10 black horses in the stable. They wore simple steel helmets to protect them from being bitten by the monsters in the radiation zone when they passed through the radiation zone. Although the monsters in the radiation zone couldn't be compared to the monsters outside the giant wall, but it was still extremely dangerous. However, This was not under the management of consortium hunters like Dean. It was handled by the army and the Knights of Light from the Holy Church. Everyone turned over and mounted the horse. Dean saw that the young instructor hadn't delivered the dry food yet, so he could only give up. He turned over and climbed on a big horse. Glenn shouted, "Go!" The team of 7 people, including Dean, immediately galloped along the path of the territory. After leaving the territory, everyone went straight to the wasteland of the radiation zone. Along the way, occasionally bumped into some beasts in the radiation zone. There were pythons coiled on the roadside and small groups of 3 to 5 wolves. These monsters had slight changes in their bodies due to the infiltration of the radiation zone. Some parts of their bodies ulcerated, and some parts of their bodies grew strange cuticle. These hungry beasts saw Dean and others and were about to pounce on them. Glenn snorted and didn't do anything. The hungry beasts quickly retreated in fear. It seemed that they had encountered something extremely vicious. Dean wasn't surprised. He knew that it was because of her magic marks. Otherwise, it would be difficult to scare away the beasts, especially the hungry beasts. But the magic marks were different. They carried the smell of the monsters outside the giant wall. For these beasts, hunters were like monsters in human skin. It was good enough that they didn't hunt them. How would they dare to take the initiative to come and feed themselves? Soon, everyone arrived outside the giant wall. "You are here. The passage has been opened for you." A middle-aged man wearing the uniform of the Melon Consortium stood in front of the giant wall. Glenn nodded to him. She dismounted and took the lead to enter the passage. They came to the dark underground passage. Glenn and the other 5 stopped halfway. They clasped their hands together and prayed to the goddess of the hunt engraved on the wall of the passage. But because of the urgency of the situation, they only prayed symbolically and quickly walked along the passage. Dean glanced at them and followed behind them. Once again, they came to the outside of the giant wall. Dean found that the entrance to the passage was different from the last one. It should be another entrance controlled by the consortium. Outside the entrance was not a plain, but a forest of more than 20 meters high trees. Each tree was like a lonely pin without branches or leaves. Glenn entered the forest of giant trees. She was familiar with the path and quickly moved in a direction. The others followed and protected Dean in the center of the team. Dean suddenly felt the gap between him and the other hunters. They could easily keep up with Glenn's pace, but he needed to use 70 to 80% of his strength to keep up. Otherwise, he would fall behind. It seems that there are physical differences even between primary hunters. Dean thought, but I haven't used the god's blessing that I have accumulated in the last 2 months. There are also 210 cold crystals collected in area number 9. Along the edge of the forest of giant trees, there was a broken highway covered with moss. "Bridge," Glenn said, and quickly jumped onto the highway. The corner of Dean's mouth twitched as he followed behind. "Area number 1 is in front of us." Glenn looked back at Dean and said, "When we reach area number 1, you just have to protect yourself. It is best not to take it lightly. Melon Consortium has more than 20 areas. It is the strongest area except for the forbidden area. All the monsters inside are above level 10. This time we're going to catch a level 26 mature black weaver." Chapter 103. Hunting level 26. Dean looked at her in horror. Although he had been practicing archery, but he had learned about the monsters outside the giant wall in the spare time of eating. For example, the last time he had hunted the Defiler was a hunting level 9 monster, and the ordinary undeads he had seen were hunting level 4 monsters. As for the Bonebiter rats, they were hunting level 3 monsters. But this time he was going to face a terrifying monster with a hunting level of 26 foot. Dean couldn't imagine what kind of terrifying existence it was. The pores on his body couldn't help but shrink. His heart was filled with a chill. Almost his first reaction was to escape. However, when he saw Glenn's unquestionable eyes, he suddenly understood that there was no way back. Although there was some panic in his heart, but he still forced himself to calm down quickly. At this point, He could only think of a way to save his life. His brain was racing, although he hadn't met the monster yet, but he felt an unprecedented crisis. What kind of monster is it? Does it have any special ability? Dean asked while thinking. Named monsters like these all had some special genetic mutation abilities. You don't need to know this. Another youth indifferently said, you are responsible for tracking its smell. You don't need to do anything. Just protect yourself. Glenn took out a string of black fragments from the small bag on her back and handed it to Dean. This is the carapace of the black weaver. Write down the smell on it. If it's convenient, can you tell me the range of the smell you can trace? Dean took the palm-sized black shell. It looked like the shell on the back of a snail. It was smooth but extremely hard. There was a layer of sticky, yellowish, viscous material on the inside of the shell. It had dried up and exuded a strong, fishy smell. He looked at it and gave it back to Glenn. I can smell strong odors up to about 20 miles away. Some lighter odors can only be smelled up to about 10 miles away. Glenn and the other 5 couldn't help but look at Dean. There was a trace of surprise in their eyes. Such a range of smell could be ranked in the top 5 of the consortium's scent tracking ability. But Dean was just a newcomer. Once his physique was enhanced, his range of smell would expand exponentially. His ranking would be even higher. Yes, Glenn nodded and said, then I'll leave it to you. Dean was relieved to see that they didn't have any objections. His actual range of smell was about 30 to 40 miles. The reason why he concealed part of it was mainly because he had offended the bloody swordsman Linda in the consortium. Naturally, he couldn't completely reveal his details. In case he was plotted against in the future, he wouldn't have any leeway to fight back. Do you smell it in the current range? Glenn asked Dudian. Dean sniffed a few times and shook his head. No, but I smell something else. It should be similar to other monsters. We don't need to care about other monsters. We only need to hunt the Black Weaver. Glenn lowered her body and said, follow me. They groped all the way along the broken highway. Dean and others followed closely behind. Glenn suddenly stopped after 4 or 5 miles. She pointed to a small depression in the distance and said, these are the footprints of a mountain lion. The Black Weaver likes to eat mountain lions. Let's keep up. Glenn looked back at Dean. You write down the smell on these footprints. If you can find the mountain lion, then tell me. Dudian nodded. Everyone followed the direction of the huge footprints that were more than a meter long. After a while, Dean suddenly said, there are other monsters in front of us. There are 3 of them. Glenn looked at a short youth on her left side. You go and check it out. The short youth nodded slightly. His figure suddenly faded and disappeared into thin air. Dean's pupils shrank as he was stunned. But soon Dean found that the smell of the short youth was still there. The next moment, he noticed that the light seemed to be distorted in the place where the short youth disappeared. There seemed to be a transparent figure moving there. He couldn't help but ask the youth next to him, what is he doing? This is his magic mark's ability, discoloration. With his thief profession, he is the most powerful scout of our consortium. The youth casually said. Dean was surprised that there was such a magical ability. In contrast, his super sense of smell didn't seem special. However, if he speculated that his magic mark's real ability could directly absorb cold crystals, then it would be a very powerful ability. Dudian followed the smell of the short youth. He quickly returned and reported to Glenn. There are 3 crocodile head wolves. Glenn slightly nodded and said, kill them. Then she directly went in the direction that Dean had pointed to. Dean was surprised. He had heard the name crocodile head wolf. It was one of the few monsters that had a hunting level of 13. It was extremely terrifying. If a primary hunter like him encountered it alone, he would definitely die. Even if an intermediate hunter encountered it, he could be killed if he was not careful. Everyone followed Glenn along the broken street ruins and quickly approached the position of the 3 alligator wolves. Dean looked from afar and saw that the 3 alligator wolves were huge. All of them were nearly 3 meters in size. Their names had the word wolf in them. Their appearance was similar to that of a wolf, but their heads were like that of a crocodile. Their mouths were long and protruding. Their sharp canine teeth were crisscrossed from their lips. Dean slightly held his breath as he saw the appearance of the 3 monsters. Whoosh! At this time, Glenn, who was walking in front, didn't stop. She suddenly flew out like a gray afterimage. The moment she rushed out, Dean felt that her smell had faded. To be precise, it had disappeared. Only her previous smell gradually faded in the air. Her armor carried a faint smell, but her face and hands didn't have any odor leaking out. Dean was surprised. At this time, Glenn quickly approached the 3 alligator wolves and appeared in their field of vision. The 3 alligator wolves also reacted and quickly changed direction. They roared and rushed towards Glenn. Whoosh! Glenn's figure suddenly jumped up from the rubble. Like a ghost, she flipped and swept past the crocodile head wolf that was the first to pounce on her. Her figure had just landed when she jumped up and dodged the attack of the second crocodile head wolf. Her feet stepped on the head of the crocodile head wolf that was trying to bite her. Her figure gently flipped and jumped behind the crocodile head wolf. 2 faint silver lights flashed in the air. The next moment, her figure flashed horizontally and appeared in front of the third crocodile head wolf pouncing over. She calmly looked at it pouncing over with its big bloody mouth. Her figure suddenly flashed and appeared on the other side of it like a ghost. At this time, there was a sudden sound. The lower jaw of the first alligator wolf fell off from its neck. Its body fell down and blood gushed out. The ground was quickly dyed red. Dean was dumbfounded. Chapter 104. At this time, Dean noticed that there was a slender strap on the outside of Glenn's thighs. There were 2 inconspicuous black daggers inserted upside down. They were a few centimeters longer than ordinary daggers. The front of the dagger was slightly curved like a sickle. At the moment, the tip of the dagger was dripping blood. It was the blood of the crocodile head wolf. Assassin. Dean suddenly thought of Glenn's profession. In the past few months of training, he had heard some news about the 2 famous senior hunters of the Melon Consortium. Their professions were warrior and thief, respectively. Glenn was a thief, but she had already advanced twice. From an ordinary thief who explored the path and made traps, she had risen to a deadly assassin who killed without blinking an eye. Just like her profession codename, Ghost Assassin. After each advancement, she would get a title that matched with her ability. It was said that Glenn's magic mark ability came from the ghost eye. It was a very terrible monster. Its vision was very strong, and its body was flexible. Moreover, it knew how to hide its breath. It could quietly approach its prey like a snake lurking in the shadows. It would wait for the right opportunity to strike. Most of the reason why her smell had suddenly disappeared was because of the magic mark. Dean was shocked. The 3 crocodile head wolves were rated as level 13. It was obvious that their combat power was far higher than the defiler that he had encountered before. However, they were instantly beheaded by this woman. His vision couldn't keep up with her speed. Moreover, the whole beheading process was as smooth as flowing water. It fully demonstrated the rich hunting experience of the other party. All the wounds were fatal. Moreover, the point of entry was the weakest part of the body. Glenn slightly waved to the others to keep up. The other 5 people stared at each other as they saw her skills. They were speechless. After all, if they were in her shoes, they would need perfect cooperation to kill the crocodiles. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. It was obvious that the gap between them and the top hunters was huge. The smell of blood will attract other monsters. The Black Weaver is timid and vigilant. It won't come over easily. Let's continue to chase. Glenn whispered as she led the way. The other 5 quickly followed. Dean looked at the 3 corpses on the ground. He couldn't help but say, "They're corpses? Are we going to leave them here?" Little guy, the value of the crocodile head wolf's carcass is not high. The fat in its body is too little, and there is more radiation in its hair. The value of collecting it is not high. We should hurry up, a youth at the end said to Dean. Because of Dean's super large range of smell, he put away his contempt for the newcomer and patiently explained. Dean caught up with the team. Following the mountain lion footprints left on the ground, everyone chased all the way. Occasionally, the footprints disappeared, but with Dean's sense of smell, he could easily find new footprints from hundreds of meters away. This was the advantage of tracking by smell, and it was an ability that many hunters envied. Along the way, they encountered a few more waves of monsters, but Glenn didn't need to do anything. She could easily take care of them all by herself. However, when they encountered a level 19 lizard, Glenn chose to take a detour. She didn't go forward to fight, although with the cooperation of the 7 of them, there was hope to kill the monster, but it was easy to cause a big movement, attract other monsters, or scare away the Black Weaver. In addition to the lizard, they also met a monster that they couldn't name. According to Glenn, it was a new type of monster that hadn't been named yet. If they killed it and brought its corpse back to the giant wall, they would get extra rewards. However, Glenn didn't intend to get involved. She gave up hunting and continued to pursue the Black Weaver. Let's take a break. The continuous journey had consumed a lot of physical strength. Glenn had continuously fought and consumed a lot of strength. She saw that it was noon, so she stopped and said to everyone, "Eat something to supplement." Everyone listened to her instructions and sat down to rest. They took out dry food and water from their backpacks and ate. Dean came in a hurry, so he didn't bring anything. He could only watch others enjoy lunch. "Here you go." Glenn looked at him and took out dry food from her backpack. She threw it to Dean. "If you can find the Black Weaver, I will owe you a favor." Dean took the dry food. He was somewhat grateful, but was surprised. "Owe me a favor? Aren't we carrying out the task under the Consortium's order?" "Yes, it is the Consortium's order, but the Black Weaver that we hunt belongs to me." Glenn didn't hide it, so instead of helping the Consortium, it is better to say that you are helping me. I have the first priority in choosing such a rare monster. Unless I don't want it, the Consortium will allocate it to the other 8 intermediate hunters. However, I like the magic marks of the Black Weaver. Dean suddenly realized that he didn't see this benefit in the contract. Most of the benefits were for intermediate hunters. As for primary hunters like them, even if they hunted a named monster, they would have to hand it in. Otherwise, there would be punishment. However, a named monster wasn't something that primary hunters could hunt. The Black Weaver that they had encountered before was in its infancy stage. It was completely luck that they were able to meet it. "It's within my ability." "You are too polite," Dudian replied politely after understanding the situation. Glenn shook her head. "I just don't like to feel indebted to others. So if it's a favor, then it's a transaction for me. As long as you have a need, I'll help you." Of course, the premise is that we have to hunt down the Black Weaver. Glenn shook her head. "I just don't like to feel indebted to others." Dean thought that she was really direct. He nodded and said, "I know. I will try my best." "Well." Glenn nodded slightly and no longer said anything. She turned to look at the ruins in the distance. It seemed that she was thinking about something. Dean quickly finished the dry food and took a little rest. Although Glenn had promised him a favor, but he didn't take it too seriously. He felt that this woman was a very calculative person. So even if he got this favor, he could only ask her for a small favor. He couldn't ask her for a big favor. Suddenly, Dean's nose twitched. He stood up and said, "I found the mountain lion." The others were silently eating dry food while thinking about their own thoughts. They heard Dean's words and looked up. They quickly put away the dry food and stood up. One of them hurriedly asked, "Where?" Dean pointed to the left. "About 20 miles from here. Let's go." Glenn made a prompt decision. She threw away the half-eaten dry food and quickly ran in the direction pointed by Dean. Chapter 105. All the way along the broken streets, covered with moss and gravel, they soon came to a low-lying, desolate open space. The area was extremely open. Dudian could vaguely see the outline of the building from the street, but the upper part had long collapsed. Broken walls and concrete gravel wrapped with steel bars were piled up on the road and covered with vegetation. Glenn's figure suddenly stopped and looked at somewhere in front of her. She raised her hand and said, "Gat, go and check it out." The one called Gat was the young thief who had the ability to change skin color. He nodded slightly, and the color of his body quickly changed. Even the black armor on his body disappeared. Dean was still surprised when he saw it again. He asked in a low voice, "Can his ability affect the armor?" "Of course not. His armor is specially customized from the Consortium. It is said that it is made from the skin and scales of the magic lizard. It can resonate with his ability." A young man next to him whispered. Dean subconsciously thought that if it was against the enemy, this ability was nothing to be afraid of. Like his own smell ability, he could easily restrain it. Even if he didn't have the sense of smell, as long as he splashed some dust or paint on the opponent's body, the discoloration ability would be completely useless. However, the terrible part of this ability was the sneak attack. It could quietly approach and kill. After all, even a strong person couldn't be vigilant all the time. After a moment, Get returned and reported, "It is indeed a mountain lion. It has hunted a scythe-hand undead and is eating." Glenn nodded slightly. "There are not many mountain lions. Black Weaver will certainly keep an eye on it. Let's wait here. Don't get too close." After saying that, she took out a bottle of pale yellow powder from her backpack, poured it into her palm, and gently sprinkled it on her tight-fitting armor. In an instant, her faint, fragrant body odor was covered by a thick stench of rotting corpses. The others were already experienced. They took out a bottle of the same pale yellow powder from their backpacks and smeared it all over their body. Their smell was immediately covered. Glenn threw the bottle into Dean's hand. "This is undead powder. It can cover up the smell, but be careful not to smear it on your skin or it will get infected." Dean took it and thought that the effect of this thing was similar to the undead plasma he smeared when he escaped the pursuit of the Defiler. In contrast, the smell of the rotten undead plasma was stronger and more thoroughly covered. However, once the blood was smeared on it, it was very troublesome to wipe it off, unlike this powder, which could be easily removed by patting it with cloth. After the 7 people were all smeared with the undead powder, only the smell of the undead was left in the place. Glenn glanced at the 6 people in the team and said, "Enluo, take the 2 of them to another direction and wait there. Be careful not to expose yourself. Signal if anything happens." Enluo's brown-haired young man nodded. Then, he turned around with the other 2 young men and left quietly. They followed the pile of rubble to another place. Dean couldn't help but ask, "Are we going to wait like this?" "That's the only way." Glenn lowered her voice. Dean asked, "What if the Black Weaver doesn't come?" "Then we will continue to wait." Glenn looked at him and said, "Hunting requires patience. Even if it is hungry, at least we still have food. Although there is more than one mountain lion in area number 1, there will be a time when it will run out." Dean thought that patience was good, but it was too stupid and inefficient to wait like this. He said, "I have an idea, but I don't know if it is feasible or not." "Huh?" Glenn and the other 3 looked at him with some doubt and astonishment. They thought that he was just a newbie who had just come to hunt. Could it be that he had any ideas? Dean looked at Glenn. "Area number 1 is too big. It will be a waste of time if we wait. Maybe the Black Weaver is looking for food at the moment. Since the mountain lion is its favorite prey, I think the mountain lion should know how to avoid its natural enemies. Therefore, the mountain lion probably won't go to the areas where the Black Weaver will appear. In other words, the chances of the Black Weaver finding it are very small. So, it is better to take the initiative to find the Black Weaver and bring the mountain lion in front of it." Glenn and the others were surprised. They thought about it carefully and felt that what Dean said was reasonable. All creatures have the instinct to avoid their natural enemies. Mountain lions live in area number 1. Naturally, they have a very strong beast intuition. You are right, but it is easy to say but difficult to do. If we kill the mountain lion, although we can use the smell of its blood to lure it, but the Black Weaver is too cunning. A dead mountain lion will not be able to arouse its interest. Glenn shook her head. Dean said, "Of course not to kill it. Many beasts don't eat dead things. These monsters are no different from beasts. I mean, we should use the method of scaring the mountain lion so that it will panic and run around. The chances of attracting the Black Weaver's attention will naturally increase." Glenn and the other 3 were startled. They looked at each other. "Yes, this is a good idea. The previous thief, Gat, couldn't help but clap his hands. The other man and woman couldn't help but look at Dean in surprise. They thought that this little melonhead was very smart. He could come up with such a clever idea. Glenn deeply looked at Dean and turned to Gat. Call the three of them back. Garter immediately agreed and disappeared. Dean hesitated. Although this method is efficient, but there is a drawback. I know. Glenn didn't wait for him to say, you don't have to worry. If we encounter other prey along the way, as long as it is below level 25, I can contain it by myself. I won't let the mountain lion die. Dean saw that she had considered this point, and he was relieved. If he didn't say it out loud, it would be his mistake if such a situation were to occur. Soon, the three who had left the squat came back, and Luo looked at Dean and said to Glenn, isn't this too rash? Let's do it. Glenn expressed her choice. She looked at the youth behind Luo and said, shoot it. The youth with the bow was the only hunter in the team besides Dean. His ability wasn't tracking by smell, but ultrasonic hearing. He had heard the previous conversation between Dean and Glenn. He slightly nodded and moved forward hundreds of meters. He came to the top of a stone and exposed his upper body. He pulled the bow and pulled an arrow. He quickly aimed at the front, and the arrow flew out. Roar! A painful scream echoed. It was particularly loud in the silent ruins. It was followed by the sound of galloping hooves running into the distance. Glenn, Dean, and the others quickly followed. They saw the place where the mountain lion had stopped. There was a bloody carcass on the ground. The internal organs and other organs were scattered on the ground. Chapter 106. In the process of chasing, Dean finally saw the appearance of the mountain lion. It was similar to the lions he knew. The only difference was the size. It was 3 to 4 meters tall and had a strong physique. The hair on its body was like sharp needles. The forelimb joints had 3 sections. Its running posture was like a spider crawling on the ground. At the moment, there was an arrow at the end of its tail. The severe pain made the mountain lion scream and run away in panic. It didn't have the slightest cruel and bloodthirsty appearance. Dean and others were smeared with undead powder, so they were not afraid of exposing their whereabouts. They followed the mountain lion closely. The distance between them was only a few hundred meters. There is a smell in front. As Dean ran, he quickly sensed the surrounding scents. He had smelled these scents early on, but he didn't warn them until they were within 20 miles. Position: 11 o'clock direction. Glenn raised her hand and made a gesture. Garter, who was in the team, understood and disappeared. After a moment, Garter reappeared in the team and said, it's a dead blood beast. Glenn said, don't pay attention to it. Continue to chase. Everyone followed the mountain lion. When a mountain lion was tired, the young hunter would pull out an arrow and shoot it. His archery was accurate and hit the target every time. On the way, occasionally some monsters of level 7 to 8 appeared. They hid in the dark and attacked Dean and others. The undead powder on their bodies made them look like walking corpses in the eyes of these monsters. Although most monsters have no appetite for ordinary walking corpses, some monsters below level 10 still like to eat this kind of fresh and juicy food with no spikes on the carapace. However, with Dean's sense of smell and the young hunter's strong hearing, these hidden monsters were discovered early on. Before they could attack, they were easily beheaded by Glenn. Her actions were clean and neat. The battle was almost finished in a few seconds. It was a complete crushing. Although the mountain lion was brutal, it was a little frightened when it was suddenly attacked. In its senses, it didn't know that the attack came from several walking dead behind it. It ran around in panic. Sometimes it was shot too painful, so it couldn't help but turn back and roar. However, it couldn't see the enemy, so it could only vent its anger on the walking dead behind it. The mountain lion's counterattack was expected by Glenn, Dean, and the others. They quickly ran to other areas that they hadn't passed through. The plan was still going on. Occasionally, it was more efficient. 2 hours later, everyone had used up most of their energy, so they stopped provoking the mountain lion and told it to rest. They also sat down nearby to rest. Such a big movement, Won't it scare away the Black Weaver? A young man couldn't help but ask. Will you be scared by your own food? Glenn asked. The young man was rendered speechless. Dean took the bottle of water from Glenn. He felt uncomfortable as he thought that she had drunk from his mouth. He quietly wiped the mouth of the bottle and then lifted the bottle to drink from it. Glenn sneered as she saw this scene, but didn't say anything. Dean returned the bottle to her and was about to rest. Suddenly, his body's pores slightly shrank. He suddenly smelled a strange, fishy smell approaching from about 30 miles away. This smell was the smell of the Black Weaver that he had smelled from the Black Fragment. It finally appeared. Dean rejoiced in his heart. The sooner he could complete the hunting mission, the sooner he could go back and continue training. Otherwise, every day he stayed in the dangerous area number 1, there was a possibility of changes happening. He didn't make a sound immediately, but waited quietly. Soon, the smell of the Black Weaver was about 25 miles away. At this time, the smell gradually faded and the body seemed to disappear. Dean was startled. He was puzzled. What's wrong? Glenn looked at him. Dean saw that she was aware of his expression, and his heart shivered. Nothing. Glenn looked at him, but didn't say anything. She sat down and rested. Her eyes fell on a mountain lion that had stopped walking slowly in the distance. A few minutes later, Dean suddenly smelled the smell of the Black Weaver that had disappeared before. It appeared again. Moreover, the place where the Black Weaver appeared was 8 miles away. The smell was extremely faint. It seemed that the Black Weaver was desperately trying to restrain itself. If the distance was not too close, it would be almost impossible for him to smell it. It's approaching very fast. Dean was shocked. He knew that he couldn't wait any longer. He immediately said to Glenn, "It appeared. It's coming here. It's about 7 miles away. No, it's even closer." Glenn and the other 5 were surprised. Get anxiously said, "Why didn't you say so earlier? Isn't the range of your sense of smell 20 miles? Dean frowned. It used some method to hide its smell. It suddenly appeared 7 or 8 miles away. Get ready, Glenn quickly said. The Black Weaver likes to sneak attack underground. Dean was able to smell it from about 8 miles away. It's very rare. Everyone prepare for battle. Gat, you protect Dean. Gat and the other 4 reacted. They thought that the Black Weaver's sneak attack had killed 3 of them, even though there were hunters in the team. It was obvious that the Black Weaver's sneak attack ability was far beyond their imagination. They pulled out their weapons and were on full alert. Glenn stared at the mountain lion in the distance. Kill it at all costs. It's best not to make any mistakes. Yes, Gat and the others' faces slightly changed as they immediately responded. At this time, Dean smelled the smell of the Black Weaver. It was about 2 miles away. The young hunter in the team seemed to have heard the movement. He hurriedly said, "It's in the 4 o'clock direction. It's going to appear." Glenn stroked the jet-black dagger beside her leg and said in a low voice, "Get ready." At this time, the mountain lion seemed to be aware of something. It stopped and turned its head to look around. It growled in a low voice as if it was trying to intimidate something. With a puff, the ground beneath it suddenly cracked open. A sharp and long black blade pierced through the soft abdomen of the mountain lion and pulled downwards. Crash! The liver and other bloody organs fell out. Large and small intestines, blood vessels, and other parts were washed out along with a large amount of blood. Roar! The mountain lion roared in grief and indignation. It twisted its limbs to struggle, but it was like a trapped beast in a cage. The ground around it cracked one after another. Sharp black thorns shot out from the ground and penetrated the body of the mountain lion. It was as if it was nailed to death by several black thorns. Whoosh! A ghost-like shadow flashed past. It was Glenn. Chapter 107. Squeak! A subtle sharp sound came from the soil under the mountain lion's feet. 4 or 5 black spikes pierced the mountain lion's body, quickly shrank back into the soil, leaving only a few bowl-sized holes. "Want to run?" Glenn raised her eyebrows. She didn't expect that the Black Weaver, who was a level 26 hunter, wouldn't have a bit of backbone. Even though it was injured, it still wanted to escape. Glenn's reaction was quick. She bent down and grabbed her dagger. She stabbed into one of the holes. The dagger seemed to have pierced something in the soil. A painful scream came from inside, but soon there was no more sound. "Come out!" Glenn's heart was filled with hatred. The two daggers in her hands suddenly flew out like a rotating knife dance. The soil under the dagger was quickly pried up and dug a deep hole. At this time, the other three quickly arrived. One of them, a young knight, let out a loud shout. He raised his spear and thrust it into one of the holes in the ground. When the spear was halfway in, it seemed to have stabbed something and stopped. The other two people saw this and hurriedly moved closer. The young knight poured all of his strength into the spear. The veins on his arms bulged. He clenched his teeth and breathed out a big breath of hot air. He suddenly lifted the spear and stabbed again in the same place. Clang! A hard force was transmitted from the bottom of the spear. The knight couldn't help but be startled. At this time, the other youth's complexion suddenly changed. He hurriedly turned back and said, "Dodge." He hadn't finished his words when a black spike suddenly ejected from the soil behind the knight. It was like a scorpion's tail swinging towards his back. Puff! Suddenly, the black spike snapped in the air. It was Glenn, who had mysteriously appeared behind the young knight. The dagger in her hand was stained with green blood, and her face was full of murderous intent. She quickly inserted the dagger into the leggings, and then raised her hand to grab the retracted part of the spike and pulled it with all her might. The knight reacted. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat. He quickly turned around and angrily thrust his spear towards the place where the spike was exposed. There was a scream from the ground. Suddenly, 4 or 5 black spikes shot out of the soil. There was no warning, and the speed was extremely fast. There was almost no time to react. The sword-wielding youth from before seemed to have anticipated this and reacted first, swinging his sword to block. The other young man was not so lucky. His reaction was a bit slower, and one of the black spikes pierced into his thigh. The flexible hunting armor did not have much resistance, and it was pierced through instantly. The tip of the spike pierced into his thigh, and a small part of the sharp horn poked out from the back of his thigh. The young man screamed in pain and brandished his saber in terror. With a clanging sound, the sharp blade was unable to cut through the black spike. The layer of shiny black carapace on its surface was extremely tough, causing the blade to easily slip. The black spike swung and dragged the young man's thighs along with it. The tearing pain made him sweat profusely. He tried his best to endure it, but the pain still made his face contorted. He could only swing his saber again and again, but the effect was not good, only leaving a few white marks. Dean and Gat were horrified as they saw the scene from a distance. They knew that Glenn was able to easily cut off the black spikes. However, they knew how tough and terrifying it was. Whoosh! Suddenly, an arrow tore through the air. With a bang, the arrow hit the black spike and immediately skidded, deviating from its path. Dean knew that it was the previous hunter who shot the arrow from behind. However, the shape of the black spike was oval, and the surface was smooth and tough. If it was not an arrow with strong penetrating power, it would be easy to deflect it. Dean secretly thought that if he could make some small spikes on the arrowhead, then it might play a role. At this time, the young knight hurriedly turned around to help the young man with the saber. The long spear angrily struck a joint in the middle of the black spike, and with a puff sound, the sharp spearhead immediately cut it off along the weak point of the joint. However, the power of the spear was also transmitted through the black spike to the young knife's thigh. The severe tearing pain made his whole body tremble, and he screamed in pain. His hands tightly held his thigh, and a trace of reason was squeezed out from his thigh. He struggled to pull out the broken part of the black spike so that the blood wouldn't splash on his wound. Glenn's body swayed as she dodged the black spike that shot out from under her feet. At the same time, she struggled to pull out the half of the black spike in her hand. From time to time, there were sharp cries full of pain and anxiety coming from the soil. In the midst of this thrilling tug of war, A sorrowful and angry roar came from the side. It was the mountain lion that was dripping with blood. It was on the verge of death. It roared ferociously as it rushed towards Glenn and the others. Glenn and the others were caught in a bitter battle. They didn't expect to be attacked by the mountain lion. All of them were surprised. The young man wielding the sword quickly waved his sword to meet the attack. The skin of his arm bulged with fine scales. The fat in the surface layer of the skin turned into a hardened cuticle, and the defense increased several times. The mountain lion fiercely collided with the young man's chest. Bang! Although the young man's block was effective, but the difference in strength between the two sides was too big. The young man was hit and flew upside down. He continued to roll a few times. He hurriedly stabilized his body. But before he could get up, his body trembled. A black spike stained with blood emerged from his back and pierced through his chest. No! The young knight glared angrily. He roared and rushed over while waving his spear. Glenn heard the sound and looked back. Her face couldn't help but change. She clenched her teeth and bent her body slightly. Her slender legs seemed to have a subtle change. There seemed to be something protruding from the black armor on her knees. At the same time, the strength of her arm seemed to have increased a lot. The black spike that she was pulling on seemed to be stretched taut. The back half of the spike's joint was faintly torn. Suddenly, the ground suddenly puffed up. A black giant suddenly flew out from the ground. Glenn, who was struggling to pull, continued to step back. It was as if her opponent had suddenly let go of the rope in a tug of war. She suddenly lost her strength and involuntarily retreated. The black spike in her hand was impressively one of the legs of the black giant. At this moment, the black giant used Glenn's pulling strength to quickly rush towards her. Several black spike-like legs flanked her from both sides. It seemed as if they wanted to hug Glenn. Glenn had been holding back her strength because she had considered such a situation. But after seeing the sword-wielding youth killed, her heart was filled with anger. Her body couldn't help but burst out with strength that exceeded the range that she could bear. Moreover, she didn't think that the Black Weaver would be so insidious. It seemed that she had been waiting for this moment. At this moment, she saw the black giant pouncing straight towards her. Her complexion changed. She hastily twisted her body. There was a faint layer of fluorescence on her skin. Her feet suddenly turned, and her body twisted in an incredible posture. She lowered her body to avoid the black giant. Whoosh! At the same time, 4 arrows were shot from a distance. Chapter 108. As the Black Weaver landed on the ground, everyone finally saw its appearance. Its body was like a giant spider. Its height was about 2 meters, and its body length was nearly 5 meters. There were 8 black, spiky spider legs under its abdomen. Each leg had 3 joints and was flexible. At the front of the legs were 2 crab pincers. From the inside of the pincers, it was obvious that its destructive power was extremely terrifying. Every part of its body was covered with a black hard shell. There was no hair. Its abdomen was extremely bloated like a spider's belly. But at the end of the abdomen, there was a hard, scaly tail. It was like a thick whip covered with spikes. Dean saw the Black Weaver from afar. There was a chill in his heart. From its ferocious appearance, he knew that its combat effectiveness was extremely terrifying. He couldn't help but worry about Glenn. Squeak! The Black Weaver screamed. It was full of impatience and anger. At the moment, 4 of its 8 legs were broken. One of them was an old wound that was still in the process of regenerating. At the moment, the remaining 4 legs were supporting its body. It was staring at Glenn like a tiger watching its prey. When Glenn saw that it finally came out of the soil, she knew that it wouldn't be able to run away for a while. She felt relieved, and at the same time, her previously suppressed killing intent couldn't stop boiling. Her arm shook slightly, and the dagger tied to her leg was sucked into her hand like a magnet. She pulled it out so fast that it was hard to see it clearly. Obviously, she was proficient in it. She held the dagger with both hands and stared at the Black Weaver. Step by step, she approached the Black Weaver. Although she was good at sneak attacks and assassinations, but there was no one in the team who could pin down the Black Weaver. She could only play the role of a warrior. On the flat head of the Black Weaver, two scarlet eyes were staring at Glenn. Transparent mucus was dripping from the back of its chin. Suddenly, the Black Weaver's forelegs sprang towards Glenn. Glenn's face was incomparably cold. There wasn't the slightest trace of fear on her face. The moment the Black Weaver pounced on her, she reacted extremely quickly. Her body flashed like a shadow as she quickly jumped towards the Black Weaver's side to chop it. The Black Weaver didn't have enough time to react to Glenn's sneak attack. However, its head suddenly turned to the left, and a white filamentous substance shot out from its mouth. Glenn's complexion changed slightly. She quickly rotated her body to divert the force and change the direction of her attack. After avoiding the white, silk-like object, Glenn quickly exerted force on her feet and approached the Black Weaver again. The dagger in her hand quickly chopped at the sharp leg of the Black Weaver. Whether it was the location of the attack or the angle of the attack, it seemed to be just right. Dean's eyes lit up. Previously, Glenn had avoided Bai's attack. It was not so much an evasion, but an adjustment in position, so that the next attack would be more accurate and ruthless. Puff! The Black Weaver's sharp leg broke and fell to the ground. Squeak! The Black Weaver screamed in pain, like nails scratching glass, extremely harsh. The blood vessels on Dean's forehead throbbed, and he felt a bit dizzy and headache. Glenn didn't seem to be affected. After landing, she rushed forward again. She didn't give the Black Weaver a chance to breathe. The Black Weaver's body fell to the ground, but it didn't jump again. Instead, it suddenly crouched down. When Glenn attacked again, the Black Weaver's tail suddenly swept out. Glenn's face changed as she heard the sound of the wind. She hurriedly dodged sideways. Once again, the distance between the Black Weaver and the Black Weaver was pulled apart. All of this happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, and it only took a short 2 to 3 seconds. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this time, the hunter-archer continued to shoot arrows at the Black Weaver. One of the arrows was aimed at the Black Weaver's eyeball, but the position was slightly off by half a centimeter. It stabbed the hard part under the eyeball. Half a centimeter deviation caused a huge difference in the outcome. It showed how important the accuracy of the bow and arrow was. Dean and Gat were watching the battle from the side. They felt sorry for him. At this time, the knight and the sword-wielding youth separated and surrounded the Black Weaver from 3 different directions. The Black Weaver was lying on the ground, looking around. It seemed that it was difficult to deal with the Black Weaver. The knight and the sword-wielding youth didn't dare to act rashly. They knew that they didn't have any fighting ability compared to the Black Weaver. The only thing they could do was to help Glenn so that she wouldn't get injured or fall into a desperate crisis. Glenn was slightly panting. She wasn't in a hurry to act. She was waiting. The Black Weaver seemed to gradually become impatient. Its body was bleeding because of the broken legs. It was gradually losing its physical strength. If it continued to wait, it would only get weaker. It looked at Glenn and the knight. It seemed to be looking for the right opportunity to attack. For a time, the open space was silent. After a few minutes, the restless Black Weaver finally couldn't help but pounce on the knight. The knight's face changed. He hurriedly retreated and waved his spear in warning. However, the Black Weaver pounced on the knight. It used its crab pincers to clamp the spear. Gotcha! The sturdy spear was easily broken. When the Black Weaver attacked the knight, Glenn also found an opportunity. She immediately attacked from another direction. Feeling her approach, the Black Weaver immediately turned around and bit her. It was as if the previous attack on the knight was just a cover. The knight was relieved as he was out of the attack range. He hurriedly narrowed the range of the attack. He waved the broken spear to distract the Black Weaver's attention so that it couldn't concentrate on Glenn. The shape of Glenn's calves was somewhat curved, unlike the straight legs of a normal human. Because of this, her speed had reached a terrifying level. Under the attack of the Black Weaver, Glenn's body twisted and turned, unexpectedly dodging all of the attacks. She was like a weightless dust. No matter how fierce the storm was, it couldn't knock her down. Puff! Glenn suddenly rushed forward. While the Black Weaver was being harassed by the knight and the sword-wielding youth, she fiercely slashed the side of its head. The sharp dagger pierced into the Black Weaver's head and quickly pulled out. The jagged dents on the dagger were quickly torn apart. The capillaries and veins were crushed, causing a great degree of bleeding. The Black Weaver screamed and turned around to bite back. But Glenn had already retreated, so she bit empty air. The knight and the sword-wielding youth were happy to see that their harassment was effective. They harassed the Black Weaver even harder. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.